You keep ignoring the red flags because all you want is love, not peace, not respect, not consistency, just love. You see the signs, you see the unanswered calls, the constant busy, the way you're always an option, never a priority. And instead of asking why it hurts, you ask how to endure it. You tell yourself it's patience, that it's loyalty, that love means staying even when it costs you. But let's be honest, she doesn't check on you. She doesn't consider your feelings. She doesn't show up the way you do. And you know that. You just don't want to face what it says about you for staying. So here's the real question you've been avoiding. How much do you actually love yourself? Because when you stay in situations that keep hurting you, when you keep accepting disrespect just to feel close to someone, that's not love. That's neglect. If you truly loved yourself, you wouldn't keep choosing pain just to feel wanted. You wouldn't keep lowering your standards to keep someone around who clearly isn't choosing you back. But you don't protect yourself, you sacrifice yourself. Because being alone scares you more than being hurt. And that's why you accept the bare minimum. That's why you stay in toxic cycles. That's why you confuse attachment with love. You're not holding on because it's good for you. You're holding on because it's the only version of love you think you deserve. And that's the lie. You don't need someone else to complete you. What you actually need is to stop outsourcing your worth. Because the moment you start loving yourself, really loving yourself, you stop begging for attention. You stop tolerating disrespect. You stop calling pain connection. You stop chasing people who only show up halfway. Self-love doesn't make you selfish. It makes you unavailable to anything that keeps breaking you. And until you learn that, you'll keep calling suffering love and calling survival loyalty. You are worth more than crumbs. You are worth more than confusion. You are worth more than being an option. But no one can convince you of that until you decide to believe it yourself. Here's the truth you keep avoiding. You don't stay because you don't see the red flags. You stay because you think leaving means nobody else will love you. So you make excuses. She's busy. She's going through stuff. She just doesn't show love the same way. But effort isn't a love language. It's a choice. And when someone keeps choosing not to show up for you, that's not confusion, that's clarity. You're not being patient. You're being hopeful in a place that's already shown you who it is. You keep giving grace to people who wouldn't give you the same. You keep explaining your pain to someone who already decided it wasn't important enough to change. And every time you stay, you send yourself a message. My feelings come second. My needs are optional. This is the best I can get. That's not love. That's self-betrayal. You think walking away means losing them, but what you're really losing right now is respect for yourself, because someone who values you doesn't make you question your worth. They don't make you beg for consistency. They don't disappear and call it space. And the reason this keeps happening isn't because you love too hard. It's because you don't love yourself hard enough to leave when you should. The moment you start choosing yourself, red flags stop looking like obstacles and start looking like exits. And exits aren't failures, they're protection. Ignoring red flags doesn't just hurt you once, it trains people how to treat you. Every time you stay after disrespect, you teach them you'll tolerate it. Every time you forgive without change, you show them your boundaries don't mean much, and they adjust accordingly. They respond less. They try less, they care just enough to keep you around, but never enough to show up fully. Because why would they? You already proved you'll stay without effort. You think you're being understanding, but what you're really doing is normalizing behavior that shouldn't have access to you. You answer late replies immediately. You accept apologies without accountability. You let patterns repeat because you're afraid of starting over, and slowly, your standards drop while their comfort rises. That's the trade you're making. You're giving someone emotional safety while you live in emotional uncertainty. And the worst part? You start blaming yourself. You tell yourself you're asking for too much, that you're sensitive, that this is just how relationships are. But healthy love doesn't require endurance. You don't have to survive it. You don't have to fight for basic respect. You don't have to convince someone to treat you well. Red flags aren't challenges to overcome. They're warnings to listen to, and the longer you ignore them, the harder it becomes to remember what being valued even feels like. The pattern doesn't break when they change, it breaks when you do. The reason you keep ignoring red flags is because you confuse attachment with love. Love feels steady, attachment feels urgent. Love doesn't make you anxious. Attachment keeps you checking your phone, replaying conversations, wondering where you stand, and you call that passion. But what you're really feeling is fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough, fear that if you don't hold on tight, you'll be forgotten. So you cling, you stay when you should leave, you wait when there's nothing coming, you accept excuses because they're easier than facing the truth. That truth being, someone who wants you won't make you feel optional. Attachment makes you chase because it needs reassurance. Love doesn't chase, it meets. And until you learn the difference, every red flag will feel like something you just need to work through. You'll keep calling distance space, disrespect miscommunication, inconsistency timing, but your body already knows that tight feeling in your chest, that constant unease, that feeling of giving more than you're getting. That's not love warning you to try harder. That's your self-respect telling you to stop. You don't need clearer signs. You don't need closure. You don't need one more conversation. You need the courage to admit that attachment is keeping you stuck in places love would never ask you to stay. Walking away feels harder than staying because staying lets you avoid the truth. As long as you're still there, you can tell yourself it might change, that maybe tomorrow they'll care more, that maybe you're just being tested. Hope keeps you stuck because leaving means admitting you invested in something that wasn't good for you. It means admitting you ignored your instincts, that you stayed longer than you should have, that you loved someone who couldn't meet you halfway, and that hurts your pride. So instead, you endure. You tell yourself pain is temporary, that love requires sacrifice, that every relationship has rough patches. But here's the part you don't want to hear. Love doesn't consistently make you feel small. It doesn't drain you. It doesn't confuse you. It doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by wanting basic respect. You stay because leaving forces accountability, not for them, but for you. It forces you to ask why you accepted less, why you ignored the signs, why you stayed quiet when your boundaries were crossed. And that's uncomfortable. But staying is costing you more than leaving ever will. Every day you remain in a situation that disrespects you, you reinforce the belief that this is all you deserve, and that belief is the real damage. Walking away isn't giving up on love, it's giving up on self-betrayal. And the moment you finally choose yourself, red flags stop feeling confusing. They feel obvious. The moment you stop ignoring red flags, everything gets quiet. No chaos, no anxiety spikes, no constant checking to see if someone still wants you. And at first, that silence feels uncomfortable because you're used to confusion, used to emotional ups and downs, used to love feeling like something you have to manage. So when you finally walk away, your brain starts questioning you. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should have stayed. Maybe this is just how love feels. But that's just withdrawal. You're not missing them. You're missing the familiarity of the pattern because ignoring red flags wasn't just about them. It was about what you were willing to tolerate to avoid being alone. Now that you've chosen yourself, you start seeing things clearly. You realize how drained you were, how often you made excuses, how little you were actually asking for compared to how much you were giving, and that clarity changes you. You don't feel pulled toward inconsistency anymore. You don't chase mixed signals. You don't feel tempted by people who only show up halfway. Because once you experience peace, chaos stops feeling exciting. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop believing love has to hurt. You stop confusing anxiety with connection. And here's the biggest shift. You stop trying to be chosen. You start choosing who gets access to you, who gets your time, who gets your emotional energy. Red flags don't feel like puzzles anymore. They feel like answers. And instead of asking me, can I make this work? You ask, does this protect me? That's when self-respect kicks in. Not loud, not dramatic, just firm. When you stop ignoring red flags, people from your past don't recognize you anymore. Not because you changed for the worse, but because you stopped being convenient. You don't explain yourself as much. You don't over-justify your boundaries. You don't stay in conversations that feel disrespectful or draining, and that confuses people. They're used to the version of you that stayed quiet, that gave chances, that tried to understand at the expense of being understood. So when you walk away faster now, they call you cold. They say you've changed. They say you're doing too much. But what they really mean is, you're no longer available for the dynamic they benefited from. People who thrived on your tolerance don't like your standards. People who were comfortable with your silence don't like your clarity. And that's okay, because growth isn't about being liked, it's about being protected. You're not harsh, you're not bitter, you're not closed off. You're just done negotiating your self-respect. You no longer wait for disrespect to become unbearable before leaving. You don't need proof anymore. The first pattern is enough. And here's the part that matters most. The right people won't question this version of you. They won't push your boundaries. They won't test your tolerance. They won't need you to over-explain. They'll feel your standards and meet them naturally. Anyone who leaves because you stopped accepting red flags was never meant to stay anyway. That's not loss, that's alignment. Self-respect feels lonely at first, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you stopped tolerating what everyone else normalized. You don't have constant access to people anymore. You don't have drama to distract you. You don't have half connections keeping you entertained. And that quiet can feel heavy, because for a long time, chaos made you feel needed, inconsistency made you feel chosen, fixing things made you feel valuable. Now none of that is there, and your brain tries to convince you that you're missing out, that maybe you were happier when you stayed, that maybe standards are overrated, that maybe being lonely is worse than being disrespected. But that's just the adjustment period. You're unlearning a pattern where love had to hurt to feel real. Self-respect strips away the noise and leaves you with truth. You start seeing how many connections were built on convenience instead of care. How many people stayed because you made it easy for them, not because they valued you. And yes, that realization stings, but it also gives you something you didn't have before. Peace, no guessing, no waiting, no emotional whiplash, just clarity. And from that clarity, your standards get quieter but stronger. You don't announce them, you don't defend them, you just live by them. And anyone who can't meet you there falls away naturally. Loneliness isn't punishment here. It's space to rebuild your sense of worth without someone else validating it. Space to remember who you are when you're not chasing or fixing or proving. And soon, that loneliness turns into confidence. Not loud confidence, stable confidence. The kind that doesn't rush, the kind that doesn't beg, the kind that knows red flags aren't obstacles, they're directions. At some point, you realize something uncomfortable. You don't actually miss them. You miss the version of yourself that kept trying to be enough. You miss the effort you gave, the hope you held on to, the belief that if you just loved harder, things would finally change, because chasing gave you purpose. It made your pain feel meaningful. It made waiting feel justified. It made disappointment feel like part of the process. Now that you've stopped, there's nothing left to fix. And that's when the grief shows up. You grieve the time you spent trying to earn what should have been given freely. You grieve the energy you poured into people who never poured back. You grieve the patience you mistook for love, not because you were foolish, but because you cared. And it hurts to admit that caring didn't save anything. you start seeing clearly how often you ignored your own voice, how many times your body told you to leave while your heart begged you to stay. You stayed loyal to people who weren't loyal to your peace, and that realization is heavy, because now you can't go back, you can't unsee the patterns, you can't pretend disrespect was accidental, you can't convince yourself that red flags were just misunderstandings. You've outgrown the version of you that survived on hope alone, and while that growth is necessary, it still feels like loss. But here's the truth: you didn't lose something real. You let go of something that only existed because you kept tolerating it. And the more distance you get, the clearer it becomes. What you were missing wasn't love, it was self-respect. Ignoring red flags was never about love. It was about not wanting to choose yourself, because choosing yourself meant walking away without guarantees, without reassurance, without someone else filling the silence. So you stayed. You told yourself love takes patience, that people need time, that your pain was just part of the process. But deep down, you knew the truth. You weren't staying because it felt right. You were staying because leaving felt terrifying. Terrifying to be alone. Terrifying to admit you deserved better. Terrifying to sit with the idea that you chose someone who couldn't choose you back, though you ignored the signs. Not because you didn't see them, but because seeing them meant action. And action meant accountability. But here's what finally clicks. Red flags don't hurt you. Ignoring them does. Every time you stayed, you taught yourself that your needs were optional. Every time you excused behavior, you taught yourself that love should be endured. Every time you waited for change, you delayed your own growth. And that cycle doesn't end when someone finally treats you right. It ends when you stop accepting what treats you wrong. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop wanting love. It means you stop betraying yourself just to keep it. It means you walk away sooner. You trust discomfort. You listen the first time something feels off. Not because you're cold, but because you're done confusing pain with connection. And once you reach this point, red flags don't feel complicated anymore. They feel clear. You don't argue with them. You don't negotiate with them. You don't try to turn them green. You leave because now you understand something you didn't before. Being alone is temporary. Self-betrayal is cumulative. And you're no longer willing to pay that price. That's not bitterness. That's self-respect. And that's where the cycle finally ends. I'm romantic. I believe in effort, in choosing someone daily, in love that feels intentional, not accidental. But I'm not naive anymore. I don't confuse chemistry with commitment. I don't mistake words for consistency. I don't fall in love with potential and ignore reality to protect the fantasy. That version of me is gone. Being romantic doesn't mean I overlook red flags. It doesn't mean I excuse disrespect. It doesn't mean I stay just because I feel deeply. It means I love with awareness now. I still want connection, still want intimacy, still want something real, but I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my peace just to keep a feeling alive. I know the difference now between someone who feels good and someone who is good for me. I know the difference between affection and effort, between attention and intention, and I don't chase illusions anymore. I won't romanticize someone who can't show up consistently. I won't soften the truth to protect a story I wanted to believe in. I can be tender and still have boundaries, hopeful and still realistic. Romantic doesn't mean blind. It means I care deeply, but I pay attention. And this time I don't fall in love at the expense of myself. I used to think being romantic meant enduring, staying longer than I should, giving the benefit of the doubt even when doubt was all I felt, believing that love meant patience no matter the cost. That's where it went wrong. I mistook tolerance for depth. I confused hope with commitment. I kept softening my boundaries to protect a version of love that wasn't protecting me. That wasn't romance, that was self-abandonment. Being romantic doesn't mean I ignore patterns. It doesn't mean I wait for someone to become who they promise to be. It means I listen when actions contradict words. It means I leave when effort fades. It means I don't negotiate respect just to keep a connection alive. I still believe in love that's big, in feelings that are deep, in choosing someone with intention. But now, romance has standards. I won't pour into uncertainty. I won't romanticize inconsistency. I won't stay where I feel anxious and call it passion. Romantic love should feel safe enough to be honest, stable enough to be real, mutual enough to last, and if it isn't, I don't try to fix it anymore. Because I can be romantic without being reckless with my heart. Being romantic but not naive changes how you choose people from the very beginning. You don't rush connection anymore. You don't get swept up by intensity. You don't confuse attention with alignment. You let things unfold. You watch how someone shows up when it's inconvenient, how they communicate when things are unclear, how they act when they don't get their way. Because attraction is easy, consistency is not. You stop falling for the idea of someone and start paying attention to how they actually treat you. Do they follow through? Do they respect your time? Do they show curiosity about your inner world? Or just enjoy how you make them feel? Being romantic doesn't mean you stop feeling sparks. It means sparks aren't enough anymore. You want safety with the spark, effort with the chemistry, clarity with the feelings, so you slow down, not because you're scared, but because you value yourself too much to rush into something unproven. You let people reveal who they are without trying to fill in the gaps for them. And if something feels off, you don't romanticize it. You listen, because the right connection won't need you to ignore yourself to keep it alive. Being romantic without being naive means I still believe in love. I just don't chase it blindly anymore. I don't force connections. I don't convince people to choose me. I don't stay where effort feels one-sided and call it patience. I let love meet me where I am. If someone wants me, I won't have to guess. If someone cares, I won't have to ask repeatedly. If something is real, it won't require me to ignore my instincts. I still believe in late-night talks, in choosing each other, in building something meaningful, but I don't sacrifice clarity for intensity anymore. I've learned that love isn't proven by how much you're willing to endure. It's proven by how safe you feel being yourself without shrinking, performing, or waiting. So now I don't rush toward feelings just because they're strong. I let actions catch up to words. I let time reveal truth. I let consistency do the convincing. And if someone can't meet me there, I don't make it mean love is dead. I just understand that not every connection is meant to last. I can still be soft, still hopeful, still romantic. I'm just no longer willing to lose myself for the sake of a feeling. Being romantic, not naive, changed what I tolerate. I don't excuse inconsistency anymore. I don't sit with confusion and call it giving things time. I don't ignore the feeling that something is off just because I want it to work. Before, I'd stay and explain. I'd adjust. I'd wait. Now, I observe. If effort fades, I notice. If respect slips, I address it once. If nothing changes, I leave. Not angrily, not dramatically, just clearly. I don't feel guilty walking away from things that don't align anymore, because walking away isn't punishment, it's protection. I used to think romance meant holding on. Now I know it also means knowing when to let go. I still care deeply, still feel intensely, still believe in choosing someone with intention, but I won't romanticize potential at the expense of reality. I won't stay where I feel anxious, unseen, or unsure of my place. Romance without boundaries is just hope with no direction. And now, my heart has standards, not walls, standards. Being romantic and grounded makes love feel quieter than I expected. There's no chaos, no guessing games, no emotional roller coaster disguised as passion. And at first that felt strange. I was used to intensity proving something, used to anxiety meaning I cared, used to confusion keeping me invested. But that wasn't depth, that was instability. Now, romance feels calm. It looks like consistency. It sounds like clear communication. It feels like not having to overthink where I stand. There's still excitement. It's just not fueled by uncertainty. I don't need constant reassurance anymore. I don't need dramatic gesture to feel chosen. I don't need to be chased to feel wanted. Because when something is real, it doesn't keep you on edge. Being romantic doesn't mean I crave fireworks every moment. It means I value safety with the spark, peace with the passion, connection that doesn't cost me my balance. And the biggest shift, I don't mistake calm for boredom anymore. I understand now that love doesn't have to be loud to be meaningful. Sometimes the most romantic thing is feeling secure enough to just be yourself. Being romantic, not naive, changed how I communicate my needs. I don't hint anymore. I don't water things down to avoid being too much. I don't stay silent hoping someone will just figure it out. I say what I need, not aggressively, not defensively, just honestly, because needing clarity isn't pressure. Needing consistency isn't insecurity. Needing effort isn't asking for the world, it's asking for alignment. Before, I was scared that speaking up would push people away, that if I asked for more, I'd lose what I had. Now I understand something important. If honesty scares someone off, they were never meant to stay. I don't over-explain myself anymore. I don't apologize for having standards. I don't negotiate my needs to make someone comfortable. Romance doesn't mean silence. It means trusting that the right person won't feel threatened by clear communication. They won't call it drama. They won't call it too much. They won't make you feel guilty for wanting to feel secure. They'll listen, they'll respond, they'll meet you where you are. And if they don't, I don't take it personally, because being romantic, not naive, means I'd rather be understood slowly than misunderstood forever. Being romantic with boundaries filters people out quietly. You don't have to test anyone, you don't have to interrogate intentions, you don't have to force clarity. You just stay consistent with who you are, you show up honestly, you communicate clearly. You don't overgive to keep someone interested, and that alone does the work. People who only wanted attention get bored. People who thrived on ambiguity get uncomfortable. People who wanted access without effort slowly fade, and you let them, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped chasing. Being romantic, not naive, means you don't audition for love anymore. You don't prove your worth. You don't compete for consistency. You don't bend yourself to be easier to choose. You let people meet you where you stand, and the ones who can't, they remove themselves. That used to scare you. Now it reassures you, because the right connection won't need you to lower your standards to keep it alive. It will rise to meet them. And the most romantic thing about that, you don't have to lose yourself to find love anymore. I still believe in love. That part never left. What changed is who I trust first. I believe in myself now. I trust my intuition when something feels off. I trust my boundaries when they need to be held. I trust my heart without handing it over blindly. Before, I believed love required risk at any cost, that you had to jump first and hope someone caught you. Now I know better. Real love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. It doesn't punish you for being honest. It doesn't require you to doubt your worth to keep it alive. Being romantic, not naive, means I still dream. I just don't disappear into the dream. I don't ignore red flags to protect the fantasy. I don't silence my needs to keep someone comfortable. I don't romanticize suffering and call it devotion. I let love add to my life, not destabilize it. And the biggest shift of all, I don't fear losing love anymore the way I used to, because I know I won't lose myself trying to keep it. That confidence didn't come from love finding me. It came from me finally standing with myself. Being romantic, not naive, means I didn't lose my softness. I refined it. I still believe in love that's intentional, in effort that's mutual, in choosing someone without hesitation or games, but I no longer confuse love with endurance. I won't stay where I feel uncertain. I won't fight for clarity. I won't romanticize someone's potential while ignoring how they treat me now. Romance isn't blind faith anymore. It's awareness. It's knowing that feelings matter, but actions matter more. That chemistry is exciting, but consistency is what lasts. That love shouldn't cost you your peace, your voice, or yourself. I still want something real. I still want depth. I still want connection that feels meaningful. I just won't abandon myself to get it. If someone meets me with honesty, I open my heart. If they meet me with effort, I lean in. If they meet me halfway, I walk the rest with them. And if they don't, I don't force it. I don't chase it. I don't grieve what was never aligned. Because being romantic doesn't mean I accept less. It means I know exactly what kind of love I want, and I'm patient enough to wait for something that doesn't ask me to be smaller, quieter, or less aware. I'm still a romantic. I just finally learned how to protect my heart without closing it. And that's the difference. They say your second love hits the deepest. And at first I didn't believe that. I thought nothing could touch the intensity of the first one. The first love is loud. It's reckless. It's the kind of love that makes you believe everything will work out just because you feel it so strongly. You fall without thinking. You trust without fear. You don't even know what heartbreak really is yet, so you give everything freely. But the second love comes after reality has already introduced itself. It comes after disappointment, after the nights where you questioned your worth, after you learned that love doesn't always stay no matter how hard you try. So this time, you don't rush, you don't dive in head first, you hesitate, you analyze, you protect your heart like it's something fragile because now you know it is. And that's what makes the second love different. You don't love blindly anymore, you love intentionally, you pay attention to effort, to consistency, to how someone treats you when it's inconvenient, not just when it's easy. You're still scared, but you're braver in a quieter way. You open up slowly, piece by piece, hoping you won't regret it again. And somehow, it still means more than you expected, because after being broken once, feeling safe again hits different. Feeling chosen without having to beg hits different. Being loved without chaos feels almost unfamiliar at first. You keep waiting for the catch. For the moment it all falls apart, but it doesn't, at least not right away. The second love isn't about butterflies in your stomach. It's about calm in your chest. It's about being understood without having to explain yourself over and over. It's about not feeling anxious when your phone is quiet. It's about knowing where you stand. It's about realizing that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. And even if the second love doesn't last forever, it leaves a different kind of mark. It teaches you what love is supposed to feel like. It shows you that you can love deeply without losing yourself, that you can stay soft without being naive, that healing doesn't mean closing your heart, it means choosing better. Your first love changes you, but your second love reminds you why you didn't give up on love in the first place. And that's why it hurts deeper, because this time you knew what you were risking and you loved anyway. What people don't tell you is that the second love doesn't just affect your heart, it reshapes the way you see everything. You're not the same person you were the first time you fell in love. You're more aware now, more cautious. You've seen how quickly things can change, how someone can promise forever and still walk away. So you love with your eyes open this time. You notice the small things, the tone shifts, the effort levels, the moments where silence says more than words ever could. You're not naive anymore, but you're not closed off either. And that's the dangerous balance, because part of you is still hopeful, still wanting to believe that this time will be different, that maybe this love will be the one that stays. And because you're loving with intention now, when it starts to slip, you feel it immediately. The second love hurts because you don't get blindsided. You see it coming. You sense the distance before it's spoken. You feel the warmth fade before it's gone. You recognize the patterns because you've lived them before, and yet you still stay longer than you should. Not because you're desperate, but because you understand love better now. You know relationships aren't perfect. You know people struggle. You try to be patient. You try to communicate. You try to fix instead of flee. That's what makes it cut deeper when it ends. Because you didn't love blindly. You loved consciously. You loved knowing the risk. The second love doesn't shatter you the way the first one does. It doesn't leave you confused about what went wrong. Instead, it leaves you quietly exhausted. You don't cry as loudly. You don't fall apart as dramatically. You just sit with this heavy realization that sometimes, even when you do things the right way, love can still end. And that's a different kind of pain. It's the pain of knowing you grew, healed, and tried again, and still didn't get the ending you hoped for. But it's also the pain that proves how strong you've become, because even after everything, you were still capable of opening your heart again. That matters more than you think. The second love stays with you in quieter ways, not as chaos, not as obsession, but as reflection. It makes you look at yourself differently, at the way you love, at the boundaries you set, at the parts of you that grew stronger and the parts that are still tender. You don't replay every moment wondering what you did wrong like the first time. Instead, you replay moments wondering how something that felt so healthy could still slip through your fingers. And that's when it hits you. Love isn't a guarantee. Effort doesn't come with insurance. Doing your best doesn't mean you'll always get to keep what you care about. That realization hurts, but it also matures you. You stop romanticizing pain. You stop thinking love has to be hard to be meaningful. You stop chasing people who can't meet you where you are. The second love teaches you discernment. It teaches you that chemistry isn't enough, that timing matters, that two good people can still be wrong for each other in that moment of life. And accepting that is one of the hardest lessons there is. You don't come out of it bitter, at least not if you're honest with yourself. You come out clearer. You know what you want now, what you won't tolerate, what you deserve without needing to explain it to anyone. And even though it didn't last, it didn't fail, it served its purpose. It showed you that love can feel safe, that connection can be calm, that you don't have to lose yourself to be close to someone. The second love doesn't destroy your belief in love, it refines it. It strips away the fantasy and leaves you with truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is always better than illusion. Because now, when love comes again, and it will, you won't be chasing it, you'll be choosing it. What makes the second love linger is how close it came to being right. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't built on illusion. It felt grounded, like something you could grow into, instead of something you were chasing. And that's why letting it go feels so unfair. You did the work this time. You showed up differently. You loved with awareness, and still it slipped away. That's the part nobody prepares you for. You start asking quieter questions. Not why wasn't I enough, but why wasn't this the right time? You realize that love isn't just about effort or intention. It's also about alignment. About two people being ready in the same season of life. And sometimes, no matter how real it feels, the timing just isn't there. The second love teaches you that endings don't always come from betrayal or lack of care. Sometimes they come from growth pulling people in different directions. From life demanding things one person is ready to give and the other isn't yet. And that kind of ending hurts because there's no villain to blame. You don't leave angry, you leave understanding, and that understanding weighs heavy. But here's the quiet truth. The second love doesn't close your heart, it strengthens it. It proves you're capable of loving again without losing yourself. It shows you that healing worked, that you didn't harden, that you didn't shut down. You took the risk again, knowing how badly it could hurt, and that courage matters because love isn't measured by how long it lasts. It's measured by how honestly it's given, and the second love is often the most honest version of you. Not perfect, not fearless, but real, and that's something no ending can take away. The second love changes how you carry yourself afterward. You don't walk away shattered, but you don't walk away untouched either. There's a quiet shift in you. You become softer in some places, stronger in others. You learn how to sit with loss without letting it turn into bitterness, and that balance takes time. You notice how you move differently now. You're slower to give access to your heart, but not closed. You're more honest about what you need, even if it risks someone leaving. You no longer stay silent just to keep the peace, because the second love taught you that losing yourself slowly is worse than losing someone quickly. You also learn that closure doesn't always come from a conversation. Sometimes it comes from acceptance, from realizing that you gave what you could with what you knew at the time, that both of you tried in the ways you knew how, and that an ending doesn't erase the good that existed. The memories don't hurt the same way anymore. They don't stab, they ache, and even that ache becomes familiar, manageable. It reminds you that you once felt safe with someone, and that means you can feel that way again. Maybe not with them, but with someone else, someday. The second love doesn't leave you afraid to love again. It leaves you prepared. You know what to look for now. You know the difference between attention and effort, between chemistry and compatibility, between wanting someone and being ready to build with them. And when love finds you again, because it will, you won't be chasing the feeling. You'll be recognizing calm, mutual, grounded, something that doesn't ask you to prove your worth or question your place. That's the quiet gift of the second love. It doesn't stay forever, but it stays with you in the way you love next. There's a moment after the second love ends where you realize you're not angry anymore. Not at them, not even at yourself. You're just tired. Tired in a way that only comes from caring deeply and trying your best. And that tiredness forces you to slow down and actually listen to yourself. You start asking different questions now. Not, how do I get them back? But why did I stay when I felt myself shrinking? You become more aware of the moments you ignored your intuition, the times your body knew before your heart was ready to admit it. And instead of beating yourself up for it, you start forgiving yourself for being human. The second love teaches you that loving someone doesn't mean abandoning yourself. That compromise shouldn't feel like self-erasure. That consistency matters more than intensity. And that someone can care about you deeply and still not be capable of loving you in the way you need. You also realize something else that's important. Just because a love ends doesn't mean it failed. Some connections are meant to show you a version of yourself you didn't know existed, a braver version, a more open version, a version that learned how to communicate, how to trust again, how to be vulnerable without losing control. And that version of you doesn't disappear when the relationship ends. It stays. You carry it into every interaction after, into the boundaries you set, into the standards you keep, into the way you walk away sooner when something doesn't feel right instead of forcing yourself to stay. The second love doesn't break you. It refines you. It teaches you how to love without fantasy, without desperation, without fear running the show. And even though it didn't last, it proves something important, that you're capable of loving in a healthy way. And once you know that, you never really lose. After the second love, you stop romanticizing ending. You understand that sometimes things don't fall apart loudly. They fade, they change shape. They quietly reach a point where staying would mean forcing something that's no longer aligned, and accepting that takes more strength than holding on ever did. You learn how to grieve without dramatizing. You let yourself miss them without wishing to undo the ending. You don't demonize what you had just to make letting go easier. You honor it for what it was, meaningful, imperfect, and real. That kind of honesty with yourself is growth. You also become more intentional with your energy. You don't over-explain your feelings to people who aren't listening. You don't overextend yourself to prove your worth. You save your softness for those who handle it with care. Because the second love taught you how valuable that softness actually is. And slowly, without forcing it, you start to feel whole again. Not because someone replaced them, but because you learned how to stand on your own with everything you gained from loving. You realize that love didn't take anything from you. It gave you clarity, depth, emotional intelligence you didn't have before. The second love doesn't leave you empty, it leaves you wiser. You understand now that love isn't about avoiding pain. It's about choosing something real, knowing it could hurt, and still showing up with honesty. And when you're able to do that without losing yourself, that's when love becomes something powerful instead of fragile. You're not the same person you were before them. You're better prepared for what comes next. The second love stays with you not as pain, but as proof that your heart didn't close after being hurt. Proof that you didn't let fear turn you cold. Proof that even after disappointment, you were still willing to try again. And that matters more than whether it lasts. because the goal was never to avoid heartbreak forever. The goal was to love without losing yourself. And the second love showed you that you could be open without being reckless, vulnerable without being naive. You learned how to love with balance, and one day when love comes again, you'll feel the difference immediately. It won't feel rushed, it won't feel heavy, it won't feel like you're walking on eggshells or trying to prove your value. It'll feel mutual, steady, easy in a way that doesn't scare you. You won't be chasing a feeling anymore. You'll be choosing a person, and that's the quiet beauty of the second. It doesn't promise forever, it prepares you. It teaches you that love doesn't need to hurt to be meaningful, and that peace is just as powerful as passion. So if your second love didn't last, don't mourn it like a failure. See it for what it really was. A turning point, a lesson, a reminder that your heart is still capable of real connection. The first love opens your heart. The second love teaches it how to stay open. And whatever comes next, you'll be ready for. She made me feel loved, not in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, in a steady way. She checked in, she listened, she remembered the small things, and the crazy part, I didn't know what to do with it. Because when you're used to chaos, consistency feels unfamiliar. When you're used to chasing, being chosen feels suspicious. She wasn't confusing, she wasn't distant, she wasn't playing games, she was just there. And for some reason, that scared me more than anything. Healthy love feels calm, and when you're used to chaos, calm can feel boring. There were no mixed signals, no guessing games, no hot and cold energy. She didn't make me question where I stood, and that was new. I was used to intensity, late night arguments, emotional highs and lows, passion that felt like a roller coaster. With her, it was steady, and instead of relaxing into it, I started looking for something wrong. Because when you've been conditioned to associate love with anxiety, peace feels unfamiliar. You mistake stability for a lack of spark, consistency for predictability, security for missing something. But the truth, nothing was missing. I just didn't know how to receive love that didn't hurt first. Sometimes we don't sabotage love because we don't care. We sabotage it because we don't feel worthy of it. She showed up consistently, she communicated clearly, she didn't make me chase, and instead of feeling grateful, I felt exposed, because when someone loves you properly, they see you, not just the confident version, not just the charming version. The insecure parts too, the guarded parts, the parts that still haven't healed. And when you don't fully love yourself, being loved deeply feels uncomfortable. You start thinking, what if she realizes I'm not as solid as I seem? What if she expects more than I can give? What if I mess this up? So you create distance first, you act unsure, you slow down, you convince yourself the timing isn't right, not because she wasn't enough, but because you didn't feel like you were. I told myself it wasn't the right time, that I needed to focus on myself, that I wasn't in the right headspace, that something felt off, but if I'm being honest, nothing was off. I was just scared of being responsible for something real, scared of being consistent, scared of not being able to hide behind confusion anymore. Because when someone loves you right, there's no chaos to blame, no mixed signals to point at, no drama to distract you. It's just clarity, and clarity means accountability. I couldn't say she didn't show up, she did. I couldn't say she wasn't serious, she was. So the only thing left to question was myself, and that's harder than walking away. You don't always realize what you had while you have it. Sometimes you realize it in the silence after, when the good morning texts stop, when the consistency disappears, when the calm you once questioned is suddenly gone. And that's when it hits. She wasn't boring, she was safe, she wasn't too available, she was intentional. She wasn't lacking spark, she just wasn't chaos. I confused stability with something missing because I was addicted to intensity. And now that it's quiet, I see it clearly. She wasn't asking for too much. She was offering exactly what I claimed I wanted, and the hardest part is realizing she didn't leave because she didn't care. She left because I hesitated. Growth doesn't always happen while you're in something good. Sometimes it happens after you lose it, after the silence, after the distance, after you sit alone with no one to blame but yourself. That's when reflection hits differently. You replay conversations, moments you brushed off, times she asked for reassurance and you gave her half answers, not because you didn't care, but because you weren't mature enough yet to handle something healthy. And the painful part, you finally become the version of yourself that she needed, clearer, more emotionally aware, more ready, but she's not there anymore. And that's the lesson. Sometimes the right person meets you at the wrong version of yourself, and losing them is what forces you to grow. Now the question is different. Do I reach back out, or do I let her have the peace I couldn't give her before because missing someone isn't the same as being ready for them? Regret can feel like growth, loneliness can feel like clarity, but are you actually different, or do you just miss how she made you feel? That's the part nobody talks about. It's easy to want someone back when you finally understand their value. It's harder to admit you might still not be the version they deserve. Reaching out isn't about easing your guilt. It's about being certain you won't repeat the same pattern. Because if she loved you right once, she deserves someone who can love her right back. And if that's finally you, then show up differently. If it's not, let her be loved properly by someone who was ready the first time. Being ready isn't about having your life perfect. It's about emotional responsibility. It's about being able to communicate without shutting down, being consistent without feeling trapped, being vulnerable without running when it gets real. I thought being ready meant having money right, career right, timing right, but she didn't need perfection. She needed presence. She needed reassurance without having to beg for it. She needed clarity without having to decode it. She needed someone who didn't confuse peace with boredom. And the truth, I wasn't emotionally disciplined enough. I like being loved, but I wasn't ready to love back at the same level. And that's the difference. Being ready means you don't just enjoy the love, you reciprocate it fully. Was losing her a mistake, or was it a lesson I had to learn the hard way? At first it felt like a mistake, like I let something rare slip through my hands, like I fumbled the one person who actually showed up right. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized something. If I wasn't ready, I would have hurt her eventually. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but through inconsistency, through hesitation, through emotional immaturity. And she didn't deserve that. Sometimes the loss isn't punishment, it's preparation. Preparation to become the version of yourself who doesn't run from healthy love, who doesn't confuse peace with boredom, who doesn't sabotage stability. Maybe she wasn't meant to stay forever. Maybe she was meant to show me what real love looks like, so I'd stop settling for less and stop being less. And that doesn't erase the regret, but it gives it meaning. Will she ever know how much she meant to me? Probably not in the way she deserved, because when she was loving me out loud, I was loving her quietly. When she was certain, I was unsure. When she was present, I was half in. And now that I finally understand her value, it's in hindsight. But here's what I do know. She raised my standard, not just for what I want, but for who I need to be. She showed me that love doesn't have to be chaotic to be real, that consistency isn't boring, that reassurance isn't weakness, that stability is rare, and maybe she'll never know how much she changed me. Maybe she'll never know that losing her is what forced me to grow. But one day, when I love someone the right way, fully, clearly, consistently, a part of that will be because of her, because she loved me right, even when I wasn't ready, and that's something I'll always respect. I don't care how corny it sounds. I'm not going to stop being a lover, not until I get the kind of love I've always imagined, the kind where there's no confusion, no wandering attention, no half-interest disguised as effort, just one person, and a world that feels smaller because of it. I want love where focus doesn't drift, where nobody else even registers, where loving them feels instinctive, not forced. The kind of love that doesn't try to be cinematic, it just is. Two people driving with no destination, standing in open fields, traveling for no reason other than wanting to be together. The kind of love you don't just feel in your chest, you feel it in your soul, hot, intense, alive. And I don't understand how people walk around pretending that kind of love doesn't matter. Like love is casual, like attachment is embarrassing, Like caring deeply is something you should hide because love is everything. It's sharing the world with someone, learning their habits, reading their moods, knowing them in ways no one else does. It's going from stranger to someone you can't imagine life without. And yeah, love comes with risk, heartbreak, loss, pain, but I'm here for all of it. Because if that's the price of loving deeply, I'll pay it. I'll take the uncertainty, I'll take the scars, I'll take the ache that comes with caring. What makes it hard sometimes isn't loving deeply, it's loving deeply in a world that pretends not to care. People act like being attached is weak, like wanting someone fully is desperate. They call it being nonchalant. They call it cool. They call it protecting yourself, but to me it just feels empty. I don't want love that's casual. I don't want half interest. I don't want to pretend I wouldn't be devastated if I lost someone I truly cared about. I want to feel it, all of it. I want the kind of love where my heart is completely in, no exits, no backups, no pretending. And yeah, that makes me vulnerable. It means I get hurt easier. It means I feel things more intensely, but I'd rather feel everything than live numb just to look unbothered. Because loving deeply isn't weakness, it's courage. It takes guts to say, I want you fully. I'm choosing you. I'm not scared to care. And maybe that's why it feels lonely sometimes, because not everyone is built to love like that. Some people close their hearts after pain. Others keep theirs open, not because they're naive, but because they refuse to let disappointment turn them cold. You don't love deeply because it's easy. You love deeply because it's who you are. And even when it costs you, you'd still rather feel everything than live a life that feels hollow. You already know how this can end. You know love can break you. You know it can leave scars. You know it can take pieces you don't get back. And still, you choose it. Not because you're reckless, not because you're desperate, but because a life without love feels smaller than a life with heartbreak. You're not chasing perfection, you're chasing connection. The kind that makes ordinary moments feel alive, the kind that makes the world feel louder and quieter at the same time. And once you've felt even a glimpse of that, you can't pretend you don't want it anymore. So yeah, you risk it again, you open your heart again, you believe again. Not because you forgot the pain, but because you decided it wasn't stronger than your capacity to love. Being a lover boy doesn't mean you ignore reality. It means you face it and still choose love anyway. You're not asking for perfection, you're asking for presence, for a love that feels mutual, chosen, clear. And wanting that doesn't make you unrealistic, it makes you honest. Because once you know how deeply you can love, you stop settling for anything that asks you to dim that fire. So, no, the lover boy in you isn't dying, he's just waiting. And when the right love finally arrives, he'll be ready. What people don't realize is how much strength it takes to stay soft in a world that rewards detachment. It's easier to act unbothered, easier to keep things light, easier to pretend you don't care that much, but you were never built that way. You don't love halfway, you don't feel quietly. When you care, it shows in your effort, in your loyalty, and how present you are. And that's exactly what people try to shame out of you. They tell you you're too much, too attached, too intense. Like love is something you're supposed to ration. So sometimes you wonder if you should change, if caring less would protect you, if closing off would finally make things easier. But every time you try, it feels wrong, because pretending not to care cost you more than heartbreak ever did. You don't want a love where you're constantly monitoring yourself, where you have to downplay your feelings to seem cool. You want a love where effort isn't embarrassing, where loyalty isn't laughed at, where wanting someone fully isn't treated like a flaw. And yes, that kind of love is rare, not because it doesn't exist, but because not everyone has the capacity for it. Some people love with caution, some love with conditions, some love with one foot out the door. You love with your whole chest, and that means when it ends, it hurts differently. You don't just lose a person, you lose the future you already pictured, the version of yourself that only existed with them. But even after that pain, you don't harden, you don't turn cold, you don't become bitter, you grieve, and then you stay open. Not because you're naive, but because you understand something others don't. Love isn't dangerous. Avoidance is. A life spent protecting yourself from ever being hurt is a life spent never being fully alive. So you keep choosing love, even when it costs you, even when it scares you. Because being a lover was never about guarantees, it was about courage. And no matter how many times the world tells you to be smaller, to care less, to guard your heart, you don't. Because the lover boy in you knows one truth: a heart that can love deeply is never something to be ashamed of. People who love like you often feel out of place, not because there's something wrong with them, but because the world isn't built for hearts that don't know how to love halfway. You walk into spaces where everyone is guarding themselves, where effort is calculated, where caring too much is treated like a mistake you should have learned from by now. And you can feel it, the hesitation, the emotional distance, the way people keep one foot out the door just in case. Meanwhile, you're standing there ready to choose someone fully if they'd just meet you halfway. That contrast can feel isolating. You start wondering if you're outdated, if your way of loving belongs to another time, another kind of world, because it feels like everyone else is playing it safe while you're still willing to risk your heart, and that makes you stand out. Not loudly, but deeply. You don't bond casually, you don't talk just to fill silence. When you connect, you notice things others miss, you remember details people forget, you show up in ways that don't disappear easily, and that kind of presence can be uncomfortable for people who aren't ready to be seen that closely. So they pull back, they joke about you caring too much, they call your intensity a lot, not because it is, but because they don't know how to match it. That's the part that hurts, realizing you're not too much, you're just too deep for people who only know how to skim the surface. You don't want love that feels convenient, you want love that feels intentional. You don't want someone who chooses you when it's easy. You want someone who chooses you because they mean it. And yeah, that narrows the field. It means you'll feel alone sometimes. It means you'll walk away more than you stay. It means you won't fit everywhere. But fitting everywhere was never the goal. The longing was. The lover boy in you isn't broken because he doesn't blend in. He just hasn't found the place where his kind of love is spoken fluently. And when he does, it won't feel like standing out anymore. It'll feel like coming home. Loving this deeply almost always comes with loneliness first. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because alignment takes time. When you love with your whole heart, you don't rush into anything just to feel chosen. You don't settle for attention that fades. You don't accept half presence just to avoid being alone. And that means there are stretches where it feels like everyone else has someone and you don't. You watch people pair up quickly, jump from connection to connection, call it love because it fills the space, and sometimes you wonder if you're being too patient, too selective, too unwilling to compromise. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not afraid of being alone. You're afraid of being half-loved. You don't want a relationship that feels like constant self-editing, where you have to mute your feelings, where your intensity is treated like a problem instead of a gift. So you wait, not passively, intentionally. You keep your heart open, but your standards intact. And that's the lonely part no one talks about. Choosing alignment over company, choosing depth over distraction, choosing to sit with the emptiness rather than fill it with something that won't last. Some nights it feels heavy. You question whether it's worth it, whether anyone will ever meet you at the level you're willing to love. But then you remember something important. The love you want can't be rushed. It needs two people who aren't scared of closeness, who don't joke about vulnerability, who don't treat commitment like a trap. And until that shows up, being alone is still safer than shrinking yourself. The lover boy in you isn't lonely because he's lacking. He's lonely because he's waiting for something real, and real love doesn't arrive loudly, it arrives aligned. The lover boy gets misunderstood a lot. People look at the way you love and assume it comes from neediness, from insecurity, from not knowing how to be alone, but that's never been true. You don't love deeply because you're afraid of being by yourself. You love deeply because you know how to be alone and still choose connection. There's a difference. You're not reaching for someone to fill a void. You're reaching because you want to share a life you already know how to carry on your own. But in a world obsessed with detachment, depth gets mislabeled, caring becomes too much, consistency becomes clingy, wanting clarity becomes pressure, so people tell you to chill, to play it cool, to act like you don't care as much as you do. And for a while you try. You soften your words, you hold back your feelings, you pretend you're less invested than your heart actually is. But it never feels right. Because loving quietly when you feel loudly starts to feel like lying to yourself. You don't want to be mysterious. You don't want to be distant. You don't want to be someone who treats love like a game of leverage. You want honesty. You want effort that isn't embarrassing, commitment that isn't mocked, connection that doesn't require you to minimize who you are. And the truth is, people who can't handle that were never going to meet you where you stand anyway. They confuse emotional availability with weakness because they've never felt safe enough to offer it themselves. So they pull away, they joke, they keep things light, not because you're too much, but because your depth asks them to be real. And not everyone is ready for that. The lover boy isn't misunderstood because he loves wrong. He's misunderstood because he loves honestly in a world that prefers control. And one day, someone won't ask you to tone it down. They won't call your care extra. They won't flinch at your intensity. They'll recognize it because they've been looking for someone who loves like you, without fear, without games, without holding back. One thing people get wrong about you is thinking you lose yourself in love, that you disappear, that you abandon who you are, just keep someone close. But that's not what loving deeply means to you. You don't give your heart away blindly. You give it intentionally. You're aware of the risk. You feel the fear. You know exactly how much it can hurt, and you still choose to love, not because you don't value yourself, but because you refuse to live guarded out of fear. There's a difference between protecting your heart and closing it. Closing it is pretending you don't care. Protecting it is knowing when to walk away without turning cold. And that's something you had to learn the hard way. You've loved people who couldn't meet you emotionally, who enjoyed your warmth but never offered shelter in return. And each time you didn't lose your softness, you refined it. You learned to notice effort, to listen to consistency, to believe actions more than potential. You learned that loving deeply doesn't mean tolerating confusion. It doesn't mean waiting forever. It doesn't mean accepting less than what you give. So now you love with boundaries, not walls, boundaries. You stay open, but you don't stay where you feel unseen. You express yourself, but you don't beg to be understood. You give fully, but only where there's room for you. That's growth. The lover boy in you didn't harden, he matured. He learned that protecting his heart doesn't mean dimming his light. It means choosing spaces where that light is welcomed. And that's why when you love again, it won't consume you. It'll expand you. Because this time you won't confuse intensity with imbalance. You'll recognize the difference between passion and peace. At some point, you stop mistaking chaos for passion. You stop thinking intensity means confusion. You stop believing love has to feel unstable to feel real. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes after loving people who kept you guessing, after giving effort that wasn't matched, after realizing how tired you were from loving alone in a two-person connection. Because for a long time, you thought love was supposed to feel urgent, heavy, like something you had to fight for. But real reciprocity feels different. It doesn't spike your anxiety, doesn't make you question your place. It doesn't leave you replaying conversations or wondering if you asked for too much. Mutual love feels calm, not boring, steady. It feels like someone meeting your effort without keeping score, like someone choosing you without needing to be convinced. And at first, that kind of love almost feels unfamiliar because you're used to proving yourself, used to earning attention, used to being the one who cares more. So when someone shows up consistently, communicates clearly, and doesn't flinch at your depth, your body has to unlearn the chaos. You have to remind yourself that peace doesn't mean lack of passion. It means safety. You don't feel smaller around them. You don't feel like you're too much. You don't feel like you need to dim anything. Your intensity doesn't scare them. It reassures them. And that's when it clicks. Love was never supposed to feel like survival. It was supposed to feel like partnership. The lover boy doesn't stop loving deeply. He just stops loving unevenly. He stops pouring into places that don't pour back. He stops calling inconsistency timing, stops calling confusion chemistry, stops calling bare minimum effort. Because once you've tasted reciprocity, you can't go back. You can't unfeel what it's like to be met where you stand. And that's when loving deeply finally feels light. Loving deeply doesn't disappear. It just becomes selective. After everything you've felt, everything you've learned, you don't stop wanting connection. You stop giving it away too easily. You don't rush anymore. Not because you're guarded, but because you understand your capacity. You know how much you give, how present you are, how deeply you attach, and you're careful about where that kind of love lands. That doesn't mean you're closed off. It means you're intentional. You don't entertain mixed signals. You don't romanticize inconsistency. You don't chase potential while ignoring reality. You pay attention now to effort, to follow through, to how someone shows up when things are calm, not just when things are exciting. Because you've learned that real love isn't proven in intensity alone. It's proven in consistency, and the people who are right for you won't be intimidated by that. They won't feel pressured by your depth. They won't joke about you caring too much. They won't need you to shrink to make them comfortable. They'll respect the way you love because they love the same way. That's the shift. You're not asking for more than before. You're just no longer accepting less. You still want closeness, still want loyalty, still want that kind of connection where the world feels quieter because someone chose you fully. But now you're patient with people, not with uncertainty. You're open to love, not to confusion. And that's how the lover boy grows. Not into someone colder, but into someone clearer. Someone who knows that loving deeply isn't about giving your heart to everyone who shows interest. It's about giving it to someone who knows how to hold it. Before the right love shows up, the lover boy is usually alone for a while. Not because he can't find connection, but because he refuses to force it. He's learned what happens when you fill space just to avoid loneliness, how quickly comfort turns into compromise, how easy it is to lose yourself when you accept something that doesn't fully meet you. So he chooses solitude instead, and solitude teaches him things love never could. It shows him who he is without anyone else's expectations, without adjusting his emotions, without holding back his intensity to make someone stay. He learns how to sit with himself, how to enjoy quiet, how to be fulfilled without external validation. And that's important because when you know how to be alone, you stop accepting love that feels like abandonment in disguise. During this time, he doesn't become detached, he becomes clear about what drains him, clear about what feels safe, clear about the kind of love that actually aligns with who he is. He stops craving attention, stops mistaking chemistry for compatibility, stops confusing being wanted with being understood. And yes, some days are heavy. He still wants connection, still imagines sharing moments with someone, still feels that pull toward closeness. But the difference now is that he won't trade his peace for proximity. He knows the right love won't require him to chase, won't ask him to question his worth, won't make him feel like he has to earn care. So he waits, not anxiously, not desperately, but confidently, because he understands something now. Being alone isn't a punishment. It's preparation. It's the space where he becomes exactly the version of himself the right love will recognize immediately. And when that love finally arrives, it won't feel like relief. It'll feel familiar. The lover boy was never naive. He knew what love could cost him. He knew how deeply it could hurt. He knew it could break him, leave marks he'd carry for years, and he chose it anyway. Not because he didn't understand the risk, but because a life without love felt smaller than a life with scars. For a long time, he thought loving this way was a flaw, something he'd eventually outgrow, something pain was supposed to cure, but it never did. Every heartbreak slowed him down, made him more careful, more aware, but it never killed that part of him that wanted connection, because loving it deeply was never a phase. It was part of his design. He wasn't meant to love casually. He wasn't built for half interest or emotional distance. He was built to choose one person and mean it. That's why it hurt more. That's why waiting felt heavier. That's why walking away took courage. But all of it shaped him. It taught him boundaries without bitterness, standards without arrogance, patience without self-abandonment. So now, when he looks back, he doesn't regret loving the way he did. He doesn't regret caring too much. He doesn't regret believing. He doesn't regret wanting something rare, because one day someone will meet him in that same place. They won't flinch at his intensity. They won't joke about his softness. They won't treat his loyalty like it's replaceable. They'll recognize it. And when that happens, everything will feel different. No anxiety, no confusion, no wondering where he stands, just clarity. Effort that feels mutual, love that feels chosen, connection that doesn't require him to dim anything, and suddenly all the waiting makes sense. Not because it was easy, Dios, but because it protected him from settling for less than he was capable of giving. So no, the lover boy doesn't die, he doesn't disappear, he doesn't harden into someone unrecognizable. He just learns who deserves him. And when the right love finally arrives, he won't have to prove anything. He'll simply be met, and that's all he ever wanted. Leave her alone, bro. Not because you stopped caring, but because you cared longer than you should have. You gave her chances when she gave you confusion. You gave her patience when she gave you mixed signals. You showed up consistently while she showed up only when it was convenient. And the hardest part to admit isn't that she didn't choose you, it's that you kept choosing her even when she made it clear you weren't a priority. You stayed solid, you stayed available, you stayed hoping one day she'd wake up and finally see you the way you saw her, hoping one day she'd match your effort, your energy, your care, but she didn't, not because you weren't enough, but because she was comfortable. She liked knowing you were there, she liked the attention, the validation, the way you made her feel wanted, but she never wanted to give that same certainty back. You weren't her first choice, you were her safety net, her backup plan, her just in case. And staying in that position slowly destroys you. You start questioning yourself, start wondering if you're asking for too much, start lowering your standards just to keep her around. You tell yourself, maybe she's just busy, maybe she's scared, maybe if I'm more patient she'll change. But deep down you know the truth. Someone who truly wants you won't make you feel like you're fighting for their attention. They won't leave you guessing where you stand. They won't only show up when it benefits them. So leave her alone, not out of anger, not out of ego, not to prove a point. Leave her alone out of respect for yourself, because the moment you stop texting first, stop checking her stories, stop replaying conversations in your head, stop making excuses for her absence, you'll feel it, that quiet, that peace, and it'll feel unfamiliar at first because you've been living in chaos for so long you forgot what calm feels like. But that peace is real. It's the peace of no longer forcing something that was never meant to be mutual. The peace of choosing yourself after constantly choosing someone who wouldn't choose you back. She had her chance, she saw your heart, she saw your effort, she saw what you were willing to give, and if she didn't value you then, don't give her another opportunity to waste you again, because the right person won't need convincing. And the moment you truly let her go, you make room for someone who won't treat your love like an option. Choose yourself now. Walking away doesn't feel strong at first. It feels like withdrawal, like your chest is empty and heavy at the same time, like you're doing the one thing your heart keeps begging you not to do. Because even when someone isn't good for you, your attachment doesn't just shut off. You still think about her when your phone lights up, still wonder if she noticed your silence, still catch yourself hoping she'll reach out just so you can feel chosen one last time. That's the part nobody talks about. Leaving someone you loved feels like betraying your own feelings. You start asking yourself if you gave up too soon, if maybe this time would have been different, if maybe you should have tried just a little harder. But here's the truth you keep avoiding. You already tried harder than she ever did. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. Someone who truly values you won't require you to disappear to be noticed. They won't need distance to realize your worth. They won't only miss you once you finally stop showing up. And yeah, she might notice now. She might text later. She might suddenly act interested once she feels you slipping away. But don't confuse curiosity with commitment. People hate losing access. They hate losing control. They hate realizing the person they took for granted finally chose themselves. That doesn't mean she changed, just means she felt the shift. And if you go back now, you'll teach her the same lesson again, that she can give you the bare minimum and still keep you around. Leaving is not about punishing her, it's about protecting you. It's about choosing sleep over stress, peace over potential, consistency over confusion. You're not cold for walking away, you're not heartless for setting a boundary, you're not weak for needing more than uncertainty, you're human, and you deserve a love that doesn't make you feel like you're slowly disappearing just to keep someone comfortable. Walking away hurts, but staying where you're not valued hurts longer, and one day, when the noise finally fades, you'll realize you didn't lose her. You found yourself again. Leaving her alone doesn't mean the feelings disappear. It means you finally stop letting those feelings control you. Because the hardest part isn't cutting contact. It's sitting with the silence afterward. It's waking up and realizing there's no good morning text to send, no story to check, no excuse to reach out, just to see how she's doing. Your brain will try to trick you. It'll replay the good moments, the laughs, the nights where it felt real. It'll tell you that maybe you imagined the distance, maybe you were asking for too much, maybe if you just explained yourself better she would have stayed, but you already explained yourself through effort, through patience, through showing up when it wasn't convenient. Love doesn't need translation. If she wanted to choose you, she wouldn't have kept you guessing. She wouldn't have made you feel like your presence was optional. She wouldn't have treated your consistency like something she could always come back to later. You weren't confusing. You were clear. She just wasn't committed. And yeah, it hurts realizing that the person you'd fight for wouldn't even fight for clarity with you. That's when you have to stop romanticizing the potential and start respecting the reality. Reality is this: you were giving girlfriend level energy to someone who kept you at arm's length. You were loyal to someone who wasn't sure she wanted you at all. Walking away feels unnatural because you're not used to choosing yourself first. You're used to being patient, understanding, giving people time to figure you out while you slowly lose pieces of yourself in the process. But love isn't supposed to cost you your peace. The moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop explaining, the moment you stop waiting for her to finally get it, you reclaim your power. And that scares people who benefited from you staying small. You didn't lose her. You outgrew the version of yourself that was willing to accept half love, and this is only the beginning. And the truth you don't want to admit yet is that leaving her alone feels like you're losing something. Not because she was right for you, but because she became familiar. You got used to waiting, used to hoping, used to reading into crumbs like they were signs. You trained your nervous system to find comfort in inconsistency. So when you finally step back, your body panics before your mind understands. You'll feel restless. You'll feel tempted to break your own boundary. You'll pick up your phone for no reason, scroll, close the app, open it again, just to see if maybe this time she noticed you're gone. And that urge doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're detoxing from someone who kept you emotionally hungry. Because when someone keeps you half-fed, you start confusing starvation with love. You tell yourself, maybe she just didn't know how much I cared. Maybe if I stayed a little longer, maybe I gave up too soon. But you didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you cared too much to keep abandoning yourself. You stayed long enough to know the pattern, the delayed replies, the empty apologies, the promises that never turned into action. You stayed long enough to realize that if someone wanted to show up for you, you wouldn't have to convince them. And deep down, you know that. That's why the silence hits different now. It's not empty, it's honest. For the first time, you're not waiting for her mood to decide your worth. You're not shrinking yourself to stay chosen. You're not wondering if today's the day she finally treats you right. And yeah, it hurts. Because healing doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels lonely. But loneliness with self-respect will always be quieter than love that keeps you anxious. One day you'll look back and realize leaving her alone was the moment everything started changing. Not because she came back, but because you finally came back to yourself. At some point, you have to ask yourself a hard question. How long are you willing to wait for someone to finally treat you right? Not because they're evil, not because they're a bad person, but because they keep showing you over and over that you're not a priority. And the scary part, you already know the answer. You've known it for a while. You just didn't want to accept it. Because accepting it means admitting that the future you imagined with them was built more on hope than reality. You weren't in love with what was happening. You were in love with what could have happened if they just showed up the way you needed. So you stayed, you waited, you overextended yourself, you gave patience to someone who gave you uncertainty, you gave loyalty to someone who gave you mixed signals, you gave understanding to someone who never tried to understand you, and every time they pulled away, you blamed yourself. Maybe I'm asking for too much, maybe I'm being dramatic, maybe this is just how love is, but love is not confusion. Love is not constantly guessing where you stand. Love is not feeling anxious every time your phone lights up or doesn't. Love doesn't make you feel replaceable. What really kept you stuck wasn't them. It was the version of you that believed walking away meant you failed, but leaving doesn't mean you lost. It means you finally stopped losing yourself, because staying with someone who makes you feel unwanted slowly erodes your confidence in ways you don't notice at first. You stop speaking up, you stop expecting effort, you start accepting bare minimum behavior and calling it maturity, you start shrinking your needs so you don't scare them away, and that's when love stops being love and starts becoming survival. You don't need to be less to be loved. You don't need to be quieter, cooler, easier, more convenient. The right person won't feel overwhelmed by your care. They won't feel annoyed by your presence. They won't treat your love like something disposable. They'll meet you where you are instead of making you feel like you're always asking for too much. And yeah, choosing yourself feels lonely at first because you're breaking a habit. You're breaking the habit of chasing, the habit of waiting, the habit of hoping someone will finally choose you. But peace doesn't arrive loud. It arrives quietly. In the moments you stop checking your phone, stop explaining yourself, stop wondering why you weren't enough, one day you'll realize you don't miss them, you miss who you were before you started doubting your worth, and that version of you, they're still there. You didn't lose love, you protected it. You didn't walk away from something good. You walked away from something that was slowly breaking you. And that's not weakness, that's growth. And what nobody tells you is that once you finally stop chasing them, that's when everything gets quiet. Not empty quiet, honest quiet. No more checking your phone every 5 minutes. No more replaying conversations in your head, wondering if you said the wrong thing. No more anxiety before hitting send. No more hoping today will be the day they suddenly care more. At first it feels uncomfortable because chaos became familiar, confusion felt normal, and peace feels strange when you're not used to it. You might even miss them for the wrong reasons. Not because they treated you well, but because your nervous system got addicted to inconsistency. You got used to highs and lows, to feeling chosen one day and invisible the next, to chasing validation instead of receiving love. That kind of pattern messes with your head. It makes you mistake emotional stress for passion. It makes stability feel boring and uncertainty feel exciting. But real love doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't disappear when things get inconvenient. It doesn't require you to earn basic respect. Real love feels safe. Not dull, not dramatic, safe. And when you finally step away, you start noticing things you ignored before. How drained you were, how much energy you poured into someone who barely poured back, how often you made excuses for behavior that hurt you. You start realizing how much love you actually have to give, how deeply you care, how loyal you are when you choose someone. And instead of feeling ashamed of that, you begin to see it as strength, because one day, someone will meet that energy without hesitation. They won't flinch when you care deeply. They won't pull away when things get real. They won't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by being yourself. They'll choose you without you having to beg. They'll show up without being reminded. They'll make you feel wanted without confusion. And when that happens, you'll look back at the version of you who stayed too long, and you won't feel regret. You'll feel proud that you learned, proud that you walked away, proud that you chose peace over potential, because letting go wasn't the end of your story. It was the moment you finally made space for something better. At some point, you have to accept a hard truth. If they wanted to show up, they would have. have. If they cared the way you cared, you wouldn't be confused. You wouldn't be questioning where you stand. You wouldn't be asking strangers for advice just to understand their silence. Love isn't subtle. Effort isn't hidden. Interest doesn't need decoding. When someone wants you in their life, they make space, not excuses, not delays, not half responses at midnight when they're bored. And the reason it hurts so much to accept this is because you invested emotionally before you were ever chosen properly. You imagined futures, you pictured moments that never actually happened. You fell in love with potential instead of reality. That's not weakness, that's hope. But hope becomes dangerous when it keeps you stuck, when it convinces you to stay loyal to someone who treats you like an option, when it makes you believe that patience will eventually turn into priority. It won't. People don't suddenly wake up and value you after months of showing you they don't. They don't magically learn how to love you correctly once they realize you'll stay no matter what. If anything, they learn they don't have to try. And that's why walking away feels so heavy, because you're not just letting go of them. You're letting go of the version of the future you created in your head. You're grieving something that never fully existed. That kind of loss is real. You'll miss the idea of them more than the person. You'll miss what you hoped they'd become, not what they actually showed you. And that's okay. Healing doesn't mean pretending it didn't matter. It means being honest about why it did and still choosing yourself anyway. You don't need closure from someone who couldn't communicate. You don't need answers from someone who avoided accountability. Their behavior already told you everything. Silence is an answer. Distance is a decision. Inconsistency is a choice. And once you stop chasing clarity from people who benefit from your confusion, you start reclaiming your power. You stop over-explaining. You stop proving your worth. You stop shrinking yourself to fit someone else's comfort. You realize you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And when that finally sinks in, you don't become bitter, you become selective. You start protecting your heart the same way you used to give it away. You start choosing peace over chaos, consistency over excitement, respect over attachment. Let them go, not because they're a bad person, but because they weren't your person. And the moment you truly accept that is the moment your life starts opening up in ways you couldn't see before. And the craziest part is, once you stop chasing them, you start noticing how quiet it gets. Not the painful kind of quiet, but the kind where your nervous system finally gets a break. No more checking your phone every 5 minutes. No more rereading old messages trying to find meaning. No more wondering if today will be the day they suddenly choose you. You realize how much energy you were burning just trying to feel secure with someone who never offered stability. That constant anxiety, that wasn't love. That was your intuition fighting against your attachment. Real love doesn't leave you guessing. It doesn't make you feel disposable. It doesn't require you to abandon yourself just to stay connected. And yeah, letting go hurts at first. There's withdrawal. There's nights where you want to reach out, where your fingers hover over their name, where you almost convince yourself to send that one last message. But every time you don't, you build a little more self-respect. You start realizing how much of yourself you gave away to someone who never protected your heart the way you protected theirs. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for presence. You were asking for effort. You were asking to matter. And one day, someone will meet you where you are without you having to beg, explain, or wait. They won't make you feel like you're too much. They won't make you feel like you're replaceable. They won't make you question your value in moments of silence. But you don't get to that person if you keep clinging to the ones who treat you like an option. So let this be the moment you choose differently. Not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Because the version of you that keeps chasing people who don't choose you deserves rest. And the version of you that finally walks away is the one that makes room for something real. A lot of people don't talk about how hard it is to walk away from someone you still care about, not because you don't see the red flags, but because you remember the good moments too clearly. You remember who they were in the beginning, the version of them that felt safe, the version that made you feel wanted, chosen, important, and you keep hoping that version will come back. That's what keeps you stuck. Not love, hope. Hope that if you wait a little longer, if you explain yourself one more time, if you give just a bit more patience, they'll finally show up the way you need them to. But hope can be dangerous when it's attached to someone who keeps proving they're not willing or ready to meet you halfway. Because every time you ignore their actions and listen to their potential instead, you teach yourself that your needs are negotiable. You start accepting inconsistency as normal, mixed signals as effort, bare minimum as love, and slowly, you You stop recognizing yourself. You become quieter, more anxious, more forgiving than you should be. You start blaming yourself for their lack of effort. Maybe I asked for too much. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is just how relationships are. But deep down, you know the truth. Love isn't supposed to feel like constant confusion. It isn't supposed to drain you more than it fills you. And it definitely isn't supposed to make you feel alone while you're still technically with someone. That's when you have to be honest with yourself. Not about how much you love them, but about how much staying is costing you. Because loving someone shouldn't mean losing yourself in the process. And what hurts the most is realizing that you were willing to do the hard things for someone who wouldn't even do the simple ones. You showed consistency, they showed convenience, you communicated your feelings, they avoided uncomfortable conversations, you stayed when things got messy, they pulled away the moment effort was required, and yet you still questioned yourself, you still wondered if you were the problem, if you were asking for too much, if you were expecting love the wrong way. But love isn't complicated like that. People make time for what matters to them. They protect what they value. They don't leave you guessing where you stand. The truth is, some people don't lose you because they don't care. They lose you because they never learned how to care properly. They want connection without responsibility, attention without commitment, love without effort. And you can't teach someone how to show up if they don't want to. That's why leaving isn't weakness, it's self-respect finally getting louder than attachment. It's choosing peace over potential, reality over hope, self-worth over familiar pain. Walking away doesn't mean what you felt wasn't real. It means you finally decided that you are real too. And one day you'll look back and realize that the moment you stopped chasing was the moment your life got quieter, lighter, clearer. Because the right person won't make you feel like love is something you have to earn. They'll choose you without being convinced. You stayed longer than you should have because you believed in what could be, not what actually was. You kept replaying the good moments, convincing yourself they meant more than the silence, the distance, the excuses. You ignored the way your chest felt heavy every time you waited for a reply. You ignored how drained you felt after giving everything and receiving the bare minimum. That wasn't love making you tired. That was imbalance. Real love doesn't leave you anxious. It doesn't make you feel disposable. It doesn't turn your patience into pain. And the hardest truth to accept is that some people are comfortable letting you overextend as long as it benefits them. They don't stop you. They don't reassure you. They just take until one day you finally stop giving. And when you do, they feel it. Not because they miss you, but because they miss the access. That's when they reach out. That's when they suddenly care. That's when confusion turns into regret. But by then, you've already changed. You're no longer begging to be chosen. You're no longer shrinking to fit someone else's emotional limits. You're choosing yourself the way you always wished they would choose you. And that choice, that's where your healing actually starts. At some point, you stop missing them and start missing who you were before you questioned your worth for them, before you reread messages trying to find meaning that wasn't there, or you blamed yourself for someone else's lack of effort. That's when it really hits you. You didn't lose them. You lost yourself trying to keep them. You became quieter. You thought twice before speaking. You downplayed your needs so you wouldn't seem like too much. And the crazy part is they never asked you to do that. You did it because you cared. You did it because you were afraid that being fully you would push them away. But love that only survives when you make yourself smaller was never meant to last. Real love doesn't need you to perform. It doesn't need you to chase. It doesn't make you feel replaceable the moment you stop overgiving. And once you understand that, you stop romanticizing the bare minimum. You stop calling inconsistency mystery. You stop calling neglect space. You stop calling emotional distance busy. You see it for what it really was. Someone enjoying your presence without respecting your heart. That realization hurts, but it also frees you, because now you know you're not asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And the next time someone comes along, you won't beg them to stay. You'll watch how they show up. You'll notice how they choose you without being asked, and if they don't, you'll walk away sooner. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do. And there comes a point where the pain shifts. It's no longer about missing them. It's about realizing how much of yourself you gave away just to keep them comfortable. You start remembering moments where you stayed quiet even though something hurt. Moments where you said, it's fine, when it really wasn't. Moments where you lowered your standards because you didn't want to seem demanding. You replay conversations in your head and notice how often you explained yourself, how often you justified their behavior, how often you made excuses for why they couldn't show up the way you needed, and that's when it finally clicks. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to do what they were never willing to do. You weren't needy. You were neglected. You weren't overthinking. You were being given mixed signals. You weren't insecure. You were emotionally starved. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You realize how exhausting it was to love someone who only showed up halfway, how draining it was to constantly wonder where you stood with them, how heavy it felt to care more than you were cared for. That kind of love doesn't make you feel safe. It keeps you anxious. It keeps you waiting. It keeps you stuck in a cycle of hoping they'll change while slowly losing yourself. And the saddest part, they benefited from your patience, from your loyalty, from your willingness to stay even when it hurt. You don't get rewarded for suffering in silence. You don't get love by proving how much pain you can tolerate. Love is supposed to feel steady. It's supposed to feel mutual. It's supposed to feel like effort is being met with effort, not excuses. So choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's deciding that you won't keep pouring into someone who leaves you empty. It's realizing that peace feels better than chasing potential that never becomes real. And when you finally choose yourself, you don't become cold. You become clear. Clear about what you deserve. Clear about what you won't accept again. Clear about the fact that the right person won't make you question your value in the first place. After you choose yourself, something strange happens. The noise quiets down. Your phone feels lighter. Chest doesn't feel so tight all the time. You stop waking up with that anxious feeling, wondering if today will be the day they finally show up for you or disappoint you again. You stop checking your phone every 5 minutes, stop rereading old messages, stop trying to decode tone, timing, silence, because you finally understand that love was never supposed to feel like a puzzle. And that's when you realize how much energy you were wasting on someone who was unsure about you while you were sure about them. You were loving from a place of hope. They were loving from a place of convenience. You wanted depth. They wanted access. You wanted consistency. They wanted control without responsibility. And once you step back, you see how one-sided it really was. You notice how you were always the one adjusting, always the one compromising, always the one reaching out first, always the one trying to keep things alive. That's not love. That's survival mode. Real love doesn't make you feel disposable. Doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just for wanting basic respect. And here's the hardest truth to accept. Potential means nothing without effort. You weren't in love with who they were. You were in love with who they could be, the version of them that only existed in your head. But you can't build a future with someone's maybe. You can't heal by holding on to what ifs. So you stop romanticizing the bare minimum. You stop giving credit for intentions that never turn into action. And slowly, your standards rise back up to where they were always meant to be. You start asking better questions. You start walking away sooner. You stop explaining your worth to people who never planned to value it. And the craziest part, the moment you stop settling, you realize how much you were settling before. You realize you don't miss them. You miss the version of yourself that believed love had to hurt to be real, but it doesn't. Love can be calm. Love can be safe. Love can feel like rest instead of stress. And once you experience that, you'll never beg for confusion again. Leaving her alone doesn't mean you stop caring overnight. Doesn't mean you suddenly forget her laugh, her voice, the way she made things feel alive for a moment. It means you finally accept the truth you've been avoiding. That love without reciprocity will slowly drain you until there's nothing left. You were pouring into someone who never learned how to pour back. And no matter how patient you were, no matter how consistent you stayed, you can't teach someone to value you if they don't want to. You kept telling yourself, maybe she's just going through something. You made excuses for the missed calls, the late replies, the emotional distance. You told yourself love was supposed to be patient, that real men stay, that walking away meant you didn't try hard enough. But here's the part nobody talks about. There's a difference between being patient and being neglected. There's a difference between loyalty and self-abandonment. And you cross that line without even realizing it. Every time you texted first, every time you ignored your own gut, every time you accepted the bare minimum just to keep her close, you taught yourself that your needs came second. You shrank yourself to fit into a space she barely made room for. And that does something to you. It makes you question your worth. It makes you wonder why loving someone feels like punishment. It makes you think something is wrong with you. And the truth is, you were just loving the wrong person. Leaving her alone is the first time you choose yourself. It's the first time you stop begging for effort and start demanding peace. It's realizing that love isn't supposed to feel like anxiety, confusion, confusion or constant doubt. The right person won't make you question where you stand. They won't make you compete with silence. They won't make you feel disposable. You don't need closure from her. You don't need one last conversation. Her actions already told you everything you needed to know. And as hard as it is, walking away now is what protects the part of you that still believes in real love. Part of you that deserves consistency, reassurance, and effort without having to ask. This isn't about her anymore. It's about you learning that choosing peace is not weakness, it's growth. What hurts the most isn't even losing her. It's realizing how long you stayed when your heart was begging you to leave. It's remembering all the moments you felt small but ignored it because loving her felt bigger than loving yourself. You didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because you hoped, because you saw potential, because you believed that if you loved hard enough, showed up enough, proved yourself enough, things would change. But love doesn't work like that. You can't love someone into choosing you. You can't be consistent enough to make someone consistent back. You can't sacrifice your peace forever and call it love. At some point, staying becomes more painful than leaving, and that's where you are now. You're gonna have nights where you almost text her, nights where your fingers hover over her name, where your mind starts replaying the good memories and conveniently forgets the pain. You'll miss the comfort of what was familiar, even if it wasn't healthy. That doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're human. Healing doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop going back. And slowly, without even realizing it, things will start to change. You'll wake up one day and notice your chest doesn't feel as heavy. You won't check your phone as much. Her name won't be the first thing on your mind when something good or bad happens. You'll start laughing again, not forced, not distracted, but real. You'll start feeling like yourself again. That's when you'll understand why it had to end. Not because she was evil, not because you were unlovable, but because she wasn't capable of meeting you where you stood. And staying would have cost you parts of yourself you can't afford to lose. One day, someone will choose you without hesitation, without confusion, without making you question your worth. And when that happens, you'll look back and realize leaving her alone was the moment your life finally started loving forward. And listen, there's something nobody really prepares you for after you finally walk away. The quiet, not the peaceful kind at first, the kind where there's no chaos, no waiting on replies, no wondering if today will be the day she finally shows up the way you need her to. That silence can feel uncomfortable because you got used to emotional noise, you got used to the highs and lows, the hope, the disappointment, the cycle, and when it's gone, your mind almost panics like it lost something important. But what it really lost was the stress. You're going to question yourself. You'll wonder if you were too harsh, too impatient, too emotional. You'll replay conversations and think, maybe I should have said this differently. Maybe I should have tried one more time. But understand this. If someone truly wanted to stay, they wouldn't have made you feel like you had to beg for effort. You wouldn't have had to over-explain your feelings. You wouldn't have felt like loving them was a constant uphill battle. The version of you that stayed too long did so because he believed in love. And that's not something to be ashamed of, but the version of you now, he's learning discernment. He's learning that love without respect will drain you. That potential means nothing without action. And that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. You didn't lose her. You released someone who was blocking the path to someone better, someone who won't confuse consistency with boredom, someone who won't make you feel like an option, someone who won't need reminders of your worth. Right now, it might feel like you're walking alone, but you're not going backwards anymore, and that's everything. And one day, without even realizing it, you're going to wake up, and she won't be the first thought on your mind anymore. Not because you stopped caring overnight, not because what you felt wasn't real, but because you finally gave yourself permission to move forward. The memories won't disappear, but they won't control you either. They'll just be reminders of what you survived, not what you're missing. You'll start to notice how much lighter you feel, how your chest isn't tight every time your phone buzzes, how you're not constantly checking stories, rereading old messages, or wondering why you weren't enough for someone who never knew how to love you properly in the first place. You'll realize how much of yourself you were giving away to someone who kept taking without ever pouring back into you, and that's when it hits you. The problem was never your effort. It was never your heart being too big. It was never you loving too deeply. The problem was that you were offering loyalty to someone who didn't know how to value it. You were offering consistency to someone addicted to convenience. And you were offering real love to someone who only liked the idea of being loved. Walking away wasn't a loss. It was a correction, a reset, a moment where you finally chose peace over potential, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over attachment. That takes strength most people don't have. So don't go back. Not when she gets lonely, not when she suddenly remembers your value, not when she realizes nobody else loved her the way you did, because by then you'll understand something important. Someone who truly wants you won't need to lose you to see your worth. Leave her alone, and finally let yourself be found by someone who won't ever make you question if you matter. No one really talks about how long some men are willing to wait for the one person they truly want. Not days, not weeks, months, sometimes years. And it usually starts with something small, something that doesn't sound final. She says, maybe one day. I'm just not ready right now. I need time. And he hears that like it's a promise, like it means not now doesn't mean never. So he holds on to those words, replays them, builds hope around them, and he waits. He doesn't make it obvious, he doesn't beg, he doesn't pressure. He waits quietly, patiently, convincing everyone, including himself, that he's fine. Because when a man sees you in his future, when he's already chosen you in his heart, waiting feels easier than letting go. He tells himself she's healing, she's figuring things out, she'll come back when she's ready. And sometimes it's hard to tell if that kind of waiting is beautiful or self-destructive, because love like that is rare. A man who's willing to pause his own needs, put his feelings on hold, stay loyal to the idea of you without knowing if you'll ever choose him back. That's not weakness, that's commitment. But commitment without clarity can slowly break someone. So if you have a man like that, someone willing to wait while you sort through your life, you can't treat that lightly. Take the time you need, heal what you need to heal, do what you need to do, but don't let him wait if you already know you're not coming back. Because the cruelest thing is letting someone hold on to hope when all that's waiting for them is disappointment. A lot of men won't walk away. They'll keep telling themselves one more month, one more sign, one more chance, not because they're desperate, but because they care. So if you can love him again, do it fully. And if you can't, tell him, don't make him wait just to slowly lose himself loving someone who was never going to return. What people don't see is what waiting does to him. Not on the outside. He looks fine. He still shows up, still laughs at the right moment, still pretends he hasn't built his days around the possibility of you coming back. But inside, everything is on pause. He doesn't let himself move on, doesn't let himself get close to anyone else, doesn't let himself fully hope or fully let go, because doing either would feel like betraying the future he pictured with you. So he lives in the middle, not chosen, not free, just waiting. He rereads old messages looking for reassurance that maybe he didn't imagine the connection. He remembers how you looked at him, how you laughed with him, how real it felt, and that's what keeps him there. Not obsession, not desperation, memory. He tells himself real love requires patience, that if it's meant to be, it'll come back around. But patience without direction starts turning into quiet pain, because every time you say, I don't know yet, he hears, not now, but maybe. And maybe is enough to keep him holding on. What breaks him isn't waiting itself. It's not knowing whether the waiting means something to you too. He would wait longer if he knew it mattered. He would walk away if he knew it didn't. But uncertainty keeps him stuck, and the longer he stays there, the more of himself he puts on hold. His needs, his timing, his chance to be loved fully, all for someone who may never come back. And that's the part no one talks about. Waiting doesn't just cost time. It costs pieces of him he doesn't realize he's giving away. At some point, the waiting starts asking questions back, not out loud, not in a way he can easily answer, just quiet thoughts that show up late at night when there's nothing left to distract him. Am I being patient or am I just afraid to let go? Because there's a difference. Patience comes with trust, with direction, with some kind of reassurance that the waiting has meaning, but what he has is uncertainty. He's not waiting because he's calm. He's waiting because walking away would mean admitting that the future he imagined might never happen. And that's harder than staying still, so he tells himself stories. That love is supposed to hurt a little, that timing matters more than readiness, that if he just proves he's loyal enough, consistent enough, understanding enough, it'll all make sense one day. But love isn't supposed to feel like erasing yourself. It isn't supposed to require putting your life on hold indefinitely. It isn't supposed to make you question whether your needs matter at all. Still, he stays. His hope is quiet, but it's persistent. It whispers things like, she'll come back. She just needs time. It'll be worth it. And as long as that voice exists, letting go feels like failure, like giving up on something real. What scares him most isn't the idea of her choosing someone else. It's the idea that she might never choose anyone, and he still waited anyway. That he might look back one day and realize he sacrificed his own chance to be loved fully for someone who was never coming back. And that realization doesn't make him angry. It makes him tired, because waiting stopped feeling romantic a long time ago. Now it just feels heavy. And deep down, he's starting to understand something he's been avoiding. Love shouldn't feel like standing still while life passes you by. There comes a moment when waiting stops feeling like love and starts feeling like self-abandonment. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no dramatic breaking point. It's quieter than that. It's the realization that his life has been moving around someone who isn't moving toward him. That he's been planning a future with someone who won't even promise a present. He notices it in small ways, how he avoids making plans because what if she comes back? How he turns down opportunities because he doesn't want to feel unavailable when she finally decides. How he measures his growth, his happiness, his healing against whether or not it would still fit her. And that's when it hits him. Waiting has slowly become a way of disappearing. Not because he doesn't love her, but because loving her has started costing him himself. He tells himself love requires sacrifice, but sacrifice isn't supposed to be one-sided. Real love doesn't ask you to pause your entire life without offering anything solid in return. And for the first time, he lets himself ask a dangerous question. If she never comes back, would this still have been worth it? That question hurts because the answer isn't immediate, because a part of him still wants to believe that patience will be rewarded, but another part, the quieter, tired part, knows something has to change. He starts realizing that choosing himself doesn't mean he loved her less. It means he finally loved himself enough to stop waiting in uncertainty. Letting go doesn't erase what they had. It doesn't make the feelings fake. It doesn't turn the waiting into a mistake. It just means he's done confusing hope with a promise, because love shouldn't require you to disappear quietly just to prove you're loyal. And walking away doesn't mean he stopped caring. Sometimes it means he cared enough to stop hurting himself in silence. Letting go hurts differently than waiting ever did. Waiting was familiar, painful but predictable. It gave him something to hold on to, even if that something was uncertainty. Letting go feels like free fall, because when he finally stops waiting, there's no future version of them to lean on anymore. No, maybe one day. No imagined moment where she finally says she's ready. Just silence, and that silence is loud at first. He feels it in the empty spaces where hope used to sit, in the routines he built around the idea of her coming back. For a while, he doesn't know who he is without the waiting, because waiting gave his love direction. It gave his patience purpose. It made the pain feel meaningful. Now he has to sit with something harder, grief, not just for her, but for the version of himself who believed love always meant endurance. He realizes how long he ignored his own needs, how often he told himself later, instead of asking for what he deserved now. And that realization stings, because he wasn't weak, he was loyal. He just stayed loyal to someone who couldn't meet him where he stood. Healing doesn't come all at once. Some days he still wonders if he gave up too soon, if one more month would have changed everything. But then he remembers how heavy the waiting felt, how small his world had become, how much of himself he put on hold. And slowly something shifts. He starts choosing himself in quiet ways. He makes plans without hesitation. He opens himself to new moments without checking if they'd interfere with the future that no longer exists. And for the first time in a long time, his life starts moving forward again. Letting go didn't mean he stopped loving her. It meant he stopped abandoning himself. And that's when healing actually began. After the waiting ends, there's a strange emptiness that follows, not because he lost her, but because he lost the version of himself that believed love had to hurt to be real. For a long time, his worth was tied to patience, to loyalty, to how much he was willing to endure without being chosen back, and when that chapter closed, he didn't immediately feel strong. He felt unsure, because when you spend so long putting someone else first, you forget what it feels like to be a priority in your own life. He starts noticing it in small moments, how uncomfortable it feels to ask for what he needs, how he second guesses himself when someone shows interest too easily, because ease feels unfamiliar now. He was used to earning affection, proving commitment, waiting quietly without complaint, so when someone shows up without confusion or hesitation, it almost feels wrong. Like love should require more suffering than this. That's when he realizes how deeply the waiting shaped him. He didn't just pause his life, he learned to minimize himself. He learned that his needs could wait, that his feelings were negotiable, that love meant staying even when nothing was being offered in return. Unlearning that takes time. He has to remind himself that love isn't supposed to feel uncertain, that commitment doesn't mean self-erasure, that being chosen shouldn't feel like a reward for endurance. Slowly, he starts rewriting the rules. He lets himself want clarity. He lets himself walk away when something feels one-sided. He stops confusing consistency with compatibility, and piece by piece, his sense of worth comes back, not because someone else validates it, but because he no longer abandons himself to keep someone else comfortable. He waited because he meant it, but now he understands something important. The right person won't need him to suffer quietly to prove his love. They'll meet him where he stands. Waiting leaves marks, not obvious ones. Nothing you can point to and explain easily. But after someone has waited that long, they don't love the same way again. He becomes more careful, not closed off, and just aware. Because once you've given that much patience to the wrong person, you learn how expensive your loyalty really is. He no longer rushes into hope, no longer builds futures in his head without evidence in the present. Not because he's bitter, but because he knows what it costs to believe too soon. He listens differently now. When someone says, "I'm not ready," he hears it clearly. When someone says, "I don't know what I want," he doesn't translate it into possibility. He takes words as they are, not as promises he can grow hope around. That doesn't make him cold, it makes him intentional. He still loves deeply, still commits fully, but only where clarity exists, because waiting taught him that love shouldn't feel like uncertainty stretched over time. He no longer tries to prove his worth through endurance. He doesn't stay where effort isn't mutual. He doesn't confuse potential with reality, and that makes him harder to lose, not because he withholds love, but because he now knows when to walk away. He understands that choosing someone means choosing himself too. That real connection doesn't ask him to pause his life indefinitely. It doesn't ask him to suffer quietly just to stay loyal. Waiting didn't break him, it refined him. It taught him what love isn't, though he could finally recognize what it is. And when he loves again, it won't be out of fear of losing. It will be out of certainty. The next time he loves someone, it won't start with waiting. It'll start with clarity, because once you've waited that long for someone who couldn't meet you halfway, you stop confusing effort with connection. He won't wonder where he stands anymore. He won't analyze pauses, he won't read into silence or turn uncertainty into hope, not because he's less romantic, but because he's learned what love is supposed to feel like. The next person he loves won't have to guess how he feels. They won't have to question his loyalty. They won't have to wonder if he's serious, because when he chooses fully, but this time, he'll only stay where he's chosen back. He won't pause his life waiting for someone to decide. He won't put his heart on hold for potential. He understands now that real love doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't stretch uncertainty across months and years. It doesn't ask you to sacrifice peace just to stay connected. The next person will feel the difference. Not because he loves harder, but because he loves cleaner. with boundaries, with honesty, with the expectation of mutual effort. And that's the quiet shift no one sees. Waiting didn't make him bitter, it made him precise. It taught him that commitment means nothing without intention behind it. So when he gives his time again, his patience again, his heart again, it won't be because he's afraid to lose. It'll be because both of them are choosing each other in the present. Not someday, not maybe, now. The people who wait the longest are often the hardest to replace, not because they demand attention, not because they make noise, but because they loved with patience most people don't have anymore. When he was waiting, his presence felt easy to overlook. He was steady, consistent, always there, and consistency can become invisible to people who aren't ready to value it. So they assume he'll always be there, that his patience has no limit, that his loyalty is permanent. But what they don't realize is that waiting teaches restraint. It teaches someone exactly how much they're willing to give before they stop. So when he finally walks away, it's quiet, no drama, no announcement, no attempt to make anyone regret it. He just goes, and that's when the absence is felt. Because he wasn't loud, he was grounding. He was the one who remembered, the one who stayed calm, the one who made things feel safe without asking for anything in return. And when that's gone, it leaves a space it's hard to fill, not with excitement, not with attention, but with depth. That's when people realize they didn't lose someone dramatic, they lost someone rare, someone who would have waited longer than anyone else, but chose not to abandon himself anymore. And that's the part that hurts the most. Not that he left, but that he learned how to leave. Because once someone like that is gone, they don't come back confused. They don't come back waiting. They move forward with intention. And by the time anyone realizes what they lost, he's already chosen himself. Waiting was never the problem. The problem was waiting without being chosen back. For a long time, he believed love was proven by how much you were willing to endure, how long you could stay, how patient you could be, how quietly you could hurt without asking for reassurance, and he did that. He waited through uncertainty, through mixed signals, through not right now that never turned into I'm ready, not because he didn't value himself, but because he valued love deeply, but eventually he learned the difference between commitment and self-sacrifice. Real love doesn't keep you suspended. It doesn't ask you to pause your life while someone decides if you're worth choosing. Real love meets you where you are, and the moment he understood that, waiting lost its meaning, because waiting only makes sense when both people are moving toward each other, even slowly, not when one person is standing still hoping to be picked someday. Walking away wasn't easy. It didn't feel empowering at first. It felt like grief. Grief for the future he imagined. Grief for the version of himself who believed patience would be rewarded no matter the cost. But over time, that grief turned into clarity. He realized something simple but life-changing. Love should feel mutual, certain, chosen in the present, not promised someday. So now, when he looks back on the waiting, he doesn't see weakness. He sees proof that he can love deeply. But he also sees the moment he learned to stop giving that depth to people who couldn't return it. He waited because he meant it, but he walked away because he finally understood that the right person won't need him to wait at all. They'll choose him clearly, willingly, and without hesitation, and that's not something you ever have to earn by putting your life on hold. I don't think I ever wanted too much. I didn't need perfection. I didn't need constant attention. I didn't need someone to save me. I just wanted to be cared for. I wanted someone who noticed when I went quiet, someone who checked in without being asked, someone who didn't treat my presence like something optional. But every time I tried to explain that, it sounded like neediness, like I was asking for too much. So I stayed quiet. I accepted less. I told myself I was independent enough to not need reassurance, but deep down that wasn't true. I wasn't asking to be obsessed over. I wasn't asking to be put on a pedestal. I was asking to matter, to feel like my absence would be noticed, like my feelings would be considered, like I didn't have to earn basic care by being easy, understanding, or low maintenance. And every time I didn't get that, I told myself it was fine, that this is just how people are, that expecting care is unrealistic, that I should be grateful for whatever effort showed up, but wanting to be cared for doesn't make you weak. It means you're human. It means you want a connection where effort is mutual and presence isn't forced. And the hardest part is realizing how long you stayed in places where you felt invisible just because you didn't want to seem like you needed too much. I didn't want someone to fix me. I just wanted someone who cared enough to stay aware of me. At some point, wanting to be cared for turns into accepting the bare minimum. You stop asking questions, stop expressing needs, stop pointing out what hurts, because every time you do, it feels like you're asking for too much. So you adjust, you get excited over replies that should be normal, you appreciate effort that should be consistent, you thank people for things they do effortlessly if they truly cared, and you tell yourself this is just how love works. But deep down you feel it, the imbalance, the quiet disappointment, the way you're always the one paying attention. You're not asking for grand gestures, you're asking for awareness, to be checked on, to be considered, to feel like your emotions aren't an inconvenience, but instead you keep shrinking your expectations to fit what people are willing to give. You call it being low maintenance, being understanding, being independent, when really you're just afraid that if you ask for more, you'll lose what little you have. And that's the part that hurts, because you don't want more love, you just want the love that's already there to show up consistently. You don't want to beg for care, you want it to be natural. And the longer you settle, the more you start questioning yourself. Am I too sensitive? Am I needy? Am I wrong for wanting this? But wanting to be cared for was never the problem. Staying where you're barely noticed is. Pretending you don't need care slowly disconnects you from yourself. You start ignoring your own feelings before anyone else can. You tell yourself you're fine even when you're not. You swallow disappointment and call it maturity, because admitting you want care feels risky. It feels like giving someone power to decide whether you're too much, so you choose silence instead. You become the easy one, the understanding one, the one who doesn't ask for reassurance or consistency or emotional presence. And people like that version of you because it asks for nothing, but inside something starts to dull. You feel lonely even when you're not alone. You feel unseen even when someone's there. You start questioning whether your needs are even valid anymore. That's when you know you've gone too far. Not by wanting care, but by convincing yourself you don't deserve it. You weren't meant to love people from a distance. You weren't meant to be strong at the cost of being felt. Care isn't weakness. Wanting it isn't dependency. It's connection. And the moment you deny yourself that truth, you don't just lose it from others, you lose it from yourself. There's a moment where it finally hits you. You've been caring for everyone else while no one was really caring for you. You remember how often you checked in, how often you noticed shifts in tone, how often you adjusted yourself to make things easier for others, and then you look back and realize how rarely anyone did that for you. No one asked if you were okay when you went quiet. No one noticed when your energy changed. No one slowed down enough to really see you. And that realization hurts in a quiet, heavy way, because you weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking to be prioritized above everything. You were asking for reciprocity. To feel like your presence mattered as much as you made theirs matter. That's when the exhaustion sets in. Not physical tiredness, emotional fatigue. The kind that comes from always being the one who cares first, who understands more, who gives grace even when it costs you. You start wondering how you became so good at holding space for people who never learned how to hold it for you. And the truth is uncomfortable. You taught them it was okay to lean on you without leaning back, to receive care without returning it, not because you wanted imbalance, but because you didn't want to feel abandoned. And realizing that is both painful and clarifying, because it shows you something important. You weren't asking for too much, you were just asking it from the wrong people. That realization changes how you choose people. You stop being impressed by words. You stop getting attached to potential. You stop mistaking attention for care, because now you know the difference. Care looks like consistency. It looks like remembering. It looks like showing up even when it's not convenient. So you start paying attention to who checks in without being prompted, who notices when you're off, who doesn't make you explain why you need what you need. And at first that makes your circle smaller. You walk away from people you once would have stayed for. You stop overextending. You stop being the only one holding things together. Not because you don't care anymore, but because you finally care about yourself too. You don't chase care now. You don't hint at it. You don't downplay your needs to make someone comfortable. You let people show you how they show up. And if they don't, you don't argue with it. You don't try to teach them how to care. You accept the information and move accordingly, because wanting to be cared for isn't a flaw, it's a boundary. And the moment you start honoring it, you realize something important. You'd rather be alone than be surrounded and still feel unseen. Choosing yourself feels lonely at first, not because you made the wrong choice, but because you stopped filling the silence with people who never really saw you. You notice the absence quickly, the lack of constant conversation, the quiet that comes when you're no longer overgiving just to stay connected. And that quiet can be uncomfortable because for a long time, being needed made you feel valued. Being available made you feel important. Being the one who cared most made you feel like you belonged. Now you don't do that anymore. You don't reach out first every time. You don't check in when it's never returned. You don't hold space for people who won't hold it for you. And yes, that leaves gaps, but those gaps feel different than the loneliness you had before. Before you were lonely even when surrounded by people. Now you're alone but at peace. There's no resentment building, no quiet disappointment, no wondering why you're not enough. Just space to breathe, space to feel what you feel, space to rebuild a relationship with yourself that isn't based on neglect. You start realizing that loneliness with self-respect is lighter than connection without care. And once you taste that peace, it's hard to go back, because you finally understand being cared for starts with not abandoning yourself anymore. Learning how to receive care is harder than giving it. That part surprised me. I was always good at showing up, at checking in, at being thoughtful without being asked. But when someone tried to do that for me, I didn't know how to relax into it. I questioned it. I downplayed it. I felt uncomfortable being the one who was noticed, because for so long, care felt conditional, like something you earned by being useful, easy, understanding. So when someone offers it freely, without you proving anything, your first instinct is to brace yourself. You wait for it to disappear, you look for the catch, you assume it won't last, and that's not because you don't want care, it's because you're not used to it being consistent. You're used to being the giver, the supporter, the one who adapts. So receiving feels vulnerable in a way giving never did. It means letting someone see you without performing, letting yourself need without apologizing, letting care exist without questioning your worthiness of it. That takes unlearning. It takes time to believe that you don't have to exhaust yourself to deserve tenderness. And I'm still learning that, still reminding myself that care doesn't have to be chased, earned, or negotiated. Sometimes it's just there, and allowing it in is the bravest thing you can do after spending so long surviving without it. At some point, you stop asking why people don't care. You stop replaying conversations, stop analyzing tone, stop wondering what you could have done differently. Because that question only keeps you stuck chasing explanations instead of truth. So you ask a different question. Who actually shows up for me? Not who says they care, not who means well, not who shows interest when it's easy, but who checks in consistently. Who notices when you're quiet, who doesn't disappear when you need space or reassurance or time. The answer is usually smaller than you expect, fewer people, less noise, more clarity. That realization hurts, but it also simplifies everything. You stop pouring into people who only take. You stop investing in connections that leave you feeling unseen. You don't make announcements, you don't explain your shift, you just move differently. You protect your energy. You reserve your care for those who return it naturally. And slowly you stop feeling desperate to be noticed because you're no longer surrounding yourself with people who make you feel invisible. Care stops being something you beg for and starts being something you recognize. And that's when you finally understand being cared for isn't about convincing people to treat you better. It's about choosing the ones who already do. Wanting to be cared for doesn't make you needy. It makes you honest. Needy is asking someone to fill a void they didn't create. Needy is expecting one person to carry everything for you. But wanting care, that's wanting reciprocity. That's wanting your effort to be met, your presence to be valued, your emotions to be considered. You're not asking someone to revolve their life around you. You're asking them to see you. And somewhere along the way, you were taught that asking for that was too much. So you minimized yourself. You softened your needs. You told yourself independence meant not needing anything from anyone. But that wasn't strength. That was self-denial. Because even the strongest people need to feel cared for sometimes. Need to feel noticed. Need to feel like their existence matters to someone else. You don't want care because you can't survive without it. You want it because connection is part of being human. And the moment you stop shaming yourself for wanting that, everything changes. You stop apologizing for your needs. You stop pretending you're okay with being overlooked. You stop accepting crumbs just to feel included. You realize something important. You're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong people. At the end of all this, I realized something simple. Wanting to be cared for is not something I negotiate anymore. I'm done explaining why it matters, done justifying why I feel hurt, done shrinking my needs so someone else can stay comfortable. Care is not a bonus, it's not extra, it's not something you earn by being quiet, easy, or low maintenance. It's the baseline. If someone doesn't notice me, doesn't check in, doesn't consider how their actions affect me, then they don't get access to me. Not out of bitterness, not out of anger, out of self-respect. I spent too long convincing myself that wanting care made me weak, too long accepting half presence and calling it connection, too long staying where I felt invisible, just to avoid being alone. I'm not doing that anymore. I don't need to be chased. I don't need to be obsessed over. I just need to be considered. And if someone can't do that naturally, without me begging, hinting, or explaining, then they're not my person. Because the right people won't make you feel guilty for wanting to matter. They won't make care feel conditional. They won't make you question whether you're asking for too much. They'll just show up. And until that happens, I'd rather stand alone with my needs intact than sit beside someone who makes me feel unseen. I didn't want too much, I just wanted to be cared for. And now I care enough about myself to never accept less again. The worst kind of pain isn't being misunderstood, it's being seen and still getting left behind. Because opening up isn't casual. You don't hand your real self to just anyone. You let them in on the stuff you normally keep locked up, the thoughts you argue with at 2 a.m., the fears you laugh off so nobody worries, the way you care so hard it almost feels embarrassing. And for a minute, it feels like you finally found someone safe. They read your silence correctly. They hear what you don't say. They look at you like they're not guessing, like they actually know. And that's the part that makes you soften. Then one day, they're gone. No fight. No goodbye that matches how close it felt. No ending that makes sense. Just nothing. And that nothing is loud. It sits where the connection used to be. It makes you replay everything like a crime scene. What did I do? Was I too much? Did I share too early? Should I have stayed guarded? But listen, if someone leaves after you showed them the real you, that doesn't mean you were wrong for being real. It doesn't mean your depth is a problem. It just means they weren't prepared for what they asked to see. Being open isn't the mistake. The mistake is thinking you should shrink so people won't run, because the right people don't disappear when they understand you. They get closer. After they leave, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, because now you're not just missing them, you're missing the version of yourself you were when you felt understood. You replay everything, not because you're obsessed, but because your brain is trying to make sense of something that never got an ending. You think about the way they listened, the way they noticed things nobody else did, the way you didn't have to explain yourself all the time, and now they're gone. So your mind starts filling in the gaps. You assume it must have been something you said, something you revealed too early, something you should have kept to yourself. That's how loss works when there's no closure. Your brain turns inward and starts pointing fingers. You don't just lose the person, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start telling yourself, yeah, next time don't say so much. Next time don't get attached. Next time stay surface level. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin shrinking, not because you want to, but because you're trying to protect yourself from feeling that again. But here's the part nobody tells you. What hurt wasn't opening up. What hurt was being met halfway and then abandoned. That doesn't mean vulnerability is dangerous. It means inconsistency is. And there's a difference. After something like that, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It just changes shape. You don't stop believing in people. You stop believing in consistency. You start noticing patterns everywhere, a slower reply, a shorter message, a shift in tone that probably means nothing, but your body reacts like it's everything. Because once you've been left after being seen, your nervous system remembers it before your mind does. So you stay alert, not dramatic, just cautious. You don't lean in the same way anymore. You hold back details. You soften your honesty. You keep parts of yourself for later, just in case later never comes. And the messed up part is, people don't always notice you doing this. They just feel a distance they can't explain. You still care. You're still present, but there's a layer of protection now, like glass between you and them, and you hate that because you remember how it felt before, how natural it was to let someone know you, how easy it felt to just exist without guarding every word. Now every connection feels like a risk assessment. Is this safe? Will they stay? Am I getting too close again? You don't ask these questions out loud, you just feel them, and slowly you start mistaking caution for growth. You tell yourself you're being mature, when really you're just afraid of reliving the same ending. But here's the truth. Trust didn't break because you opened up. It broke because someone showed you intimacy without responsibility, and that's not your fault. After being left like that, most people learn the wrong lesson. They think the problem was caring too much. They think the solution is to care less, so they start editing themselves. They become easier, quieter, less honest, less intense. They tell themselves, next time don't go so deep, next time don't show everything, next time stay in control. But all that really does is teach you how to survive connection, not how to experience it. You don't stop wanting closeness. You just start rationing it. You give people pieces instead of presence, versions instead of truth, highlights instead of depth, and then you wonder why connections feel empty now, why conversations don't hit the same, why nobody really knows you anymore, why being around people still feels lonely. It's because you didn't heal. You adapted. You learned how to avoid pain, not how to build something real again. And here's the hard truth. If someone can only stay when you're small, they were never meant to know you fully. Shrinking yourself doesn't protect you. It just delays the same outcome. Because the people who leave when you're honest would have left eventually anyway. All hiding does is make you lose yourself before they're even gone. At some point, you have to unlearn the lie that your depth is what pushed them away. Because if depth were the problem, it would hurt everyone the same. But it doesn't. Some people lean into it, others panic. And the difference has nothing to do with you. Depth only feels overwhelming to people who haven't met themselves yet. To someone who avoids their own emotions, your honesty feels like pressure, your awareness feels like exposure, your care feels like responsibility. So they leave. Not because you were too much, but because staying would have required them to show up in ways they weren't ready for. And that's important to understand. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for forever. You were just asking for presence, consistency, communication, effort that matched the closeness they accepted. That's not intensity, that's basic emotional accountability. But when someone isn't capable of that, they label it as too deep because it's easier than admitting they don't know how to stay. So no, your depth wasn't the problem. The problem was inviting someone into a space they didn't know how to hold. And that doesn't mean you should become lighter. It means you should become more selective. After something like this, a lot of people start punishing themselves without realizing it. They replay the moment over and over, looking for where they went wrong. They tell themselves, I should have seen it coming, I should have known better, I should have protected myself. But that's not growth, that's blame dressed up as reflection. You didn't fail by trusting, you didn't mess up by being open, you didn't lose because you cared, you just encountered someone who could only meet you halfway. And instead of letting that truth land, you turned it inward. You started questioning your instincts, your emotions, your ability to choose people. That's how one loss turns into self-doubt. You don't just grieve the person, you grieve your confidence in yourself, and slowly you start believing that maybe you're bad at choosing, that maybe your judgment can't be trusted. But here's what matters. You didn't misjudge their potential. You misjudge their capacity. Those are not the same thing. Someone can see you, feel close to you, even care about you, and still not be capable of staying. That doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you gave someone access before you saw their limits clearly. That's not something to punish yourself for. That's something to learn from without hardening, because the goal isn't to trust less, it's to trust wiser. Opening up again after something like that feels risky, not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to disappear inside it. You move slower this time, not closed, just intentional. You stop rushing closeness. You let consistency show itself before attachment does. You watch how someone handles honesty, not just how they respond to it, because being open doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means choosing who earns access. You learn that real safety isn't instant chemistry. It's follow-through. It's effort that doesn't fade when things get quiet. It's someone staying curious instead of pulling away. And you stop over-explaining yourself. You don't justify your needs. You don't apologize for caring. You don't chase clarity from people who disappear. Instead of communicate, that's not walls, that's boundaries. You realize you don't need to prove your depth anymore. The right people recognize it without being overwhelmed. And for the first time, opening up doesn't feel like self-abandonment. It feels like alignment. You're still honest, still real, still deep, just no longer handing your heart to people who haven't shown they can hold it. At the end of all this, you start to understand something important. The people who stay don't make you feel confused. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you guess where you stand. They don't make you question whether being yourself was a mistake. They stay because they see you, not in spite of it. They don't flinch at your depth. They don't rush you to be easier. They don't treat your honesty like a burden. They meet you with steadiness, not perfection. Not constant intensity, just consistency, and that's how you know. Because real connection doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't make you anxious after silence. It doesn't leave you replaying everything you said. It feels calm, grounded, safe in a way that doesn't need explaining. You stop wondering if you're too much. You stop preparing yourself for disappearance. You stop shrinking to be kept. And you realize something quietly powerful. The people who left weren't proof that you were hard to love. They were proof that you were inviting people into a depth they hadn't earned yet. And that's not something to regret, because being seen was never a mistake. Being honest was never a flaw. Caring deeply was never the wrong move. The right people won't vanish once they understand you. They'll stay because of it. The worst kind of pain isn't being misunderstood. It's being seen and still getting left behind, because opening up isn't casual. You don't hand your real self to just anyone. You let them in on the stuff you normally keep locked up, the thoughts you argue with at 2 a.m., the fears you laugh off so nobody worries, the way you care so hard it almost feels embarrassing, and for a minute it feels like you finally found someone safe. They read your silence correctly. They hear what you don't say. They look at you like they're not guessing, like they actually know. And that's the part that makes you soften. Then one day, they're gone. No fight, no goodbye that matches how close it felt. No ending that makes sense, just nothing. And that nothing is loud. It sits where the connection used to be. It makes you replay everything like a crime scene. What did I do? Was I too much? Did I share too early? Should I have stayed guarded? But listen, if someone leaves after you showed them the real you, that doesn't mean you were wrong for being real. It doesn't mean your depth is a problem. It just means they weren't prepared for what they asked to see. Being open isn't the mistake. The mistake is thinking you should shrink so people won't run, because the right people don't disappear when they understand you. They get closer. After they leave, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, because now you're not just missing them, you're missing the version of yourself you were when you felt understood. You replay everything, not because you're obsessed, but because your brain is trying to make sense of something that never got an ending. You think about the way they listened, the way they noticed things nobody else did, the way you didn't have to explain yourself all the time, and now they're gone. So your mind starts filling in the gaps. You assume it must have been something you said, something you revealed too early, something you should have kept to yourself. That's how loss works when there's no closure. Your brain turns inward and starts pointing fingers. You don't just lose the person, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start telling yourself, next time, don't say so much. Next time, don't get attached. Next time, stay surface level. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin shrinking. Not because you want to, but because you're trying to protect yourself from feeling that again. But here's the part nobody tells you. What hurt wasn't opening up. What hurt was being met halfway and then abandoned. That doesn't mean vulnerability is dangerous. It means inconsistency is. And there's a difference. After something like that, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It just changes shape. You don't stop believing in people. You stop believing in consistency. You start noticing patterns everywhere. A slower reply, a shorter message, a shift in tone that probably means nothing, but your body reacts like it's everything, because once you've been left after being seen, your nervous system remembers it before your mind does. So you stay alert, not dramatic, just cautious. You don't lean in the same way anymore. You hold back details. You soften your honesty. You keep parts of yourself for later, just in case later never comes. And the messed up part is, people don't always notice you doing this. They just feel a distance they can't explain. You still care. You're still present. But there's a layer of protection now, like glass between you and them. And you hate that, because you remember how it felt before. How natural it was to let someone know you. How easy it felt to just exist without guarding every word. Now every connection feels like a risk assessment. Is this safe? Will they stay? Am I getting too close again? You don't ask these questions out loud. You just feel them. And slowly you start mistaking caution for growth. You tell yourself you're being mature, when really you're just afraid of reliving the same ending. But here's the truth. Trust didn't break because you opened up. It broke because someone showed you intimacy without responsibility, and that's not your fault. After being left like that, most people learn the wrong lesson. They think the problem was caring too much. They think the solution is to care less, so they start editing themselves. They become easier, quieter, less honest, less intense. They tell themselves, next time don't go so deep, next time don't show everything, next time stay in control. But all that really does is teach you how to survive connection, not how to experience it. You don't stop wanting closeness, you just start rationing it. You give people pieces instead of presence, versions instead of truth, highlights instead of depth. And then you wonder why connections feel empty now, why conversations don't hit the same, why nobody really knows you anymore. Why being around people still feels lonely? It's because you didn't heal, you adapt. You learned how to avoid pain, not how to build something real again. And here's the hard truth. If someone can only stay when you're small, they were never meant to know you. Shrinking yourself doesn't protect you, it just delays the same outcome. Because the people who leave when you're honest would have left eventually anyway. All hiding does is make you lose yourself before they're even gone. At some point, you have to unlearn the lie that your depth is what pushed them away. Because if depth were the problem, it would hurt everyone the same, but it doesn't. Some people lean into it, others panic, and the difference has nothing to do with you. Depth only feels overwhelming to people who haven't met themselves yet, to someone who avoids their own emotions. Your honesty feels like pressure. Your awareness feels like exposure. Your care feels like responsibility. So they leave, not because you were too much, but because staying would have required them to show up in ways they weren't ready for. And that's important to understand. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for forever. You were just asking for presence, consistency, communication, effort that matched the closeness they accepted. That's not intensity. That's basic emotional accountability. But when someone isn't capable of that, they label it as too deep because it's easier than admitting they don't know how to stay. So no, your depth wasn't the problem. The problem was inviting someone into a space they didn't know how to hold. And that doesn't mean you should become lighter. It means you should become more selective. After something like this, a lot of people start punishing themselves without realizing it. They replay the moment over and over, looking for where they went wrong. They tell themselves, I should have seen it coming. I should have known better. I should have protected myself. But that's not growth. That's blame dressed up as reflection. You didn't fail by trusting. You didn't mess up by being open. You didn't lose because you cared. You just encountered someone who could only meet you halfway. And instead of letting that truth land, you turned it inward. You started questioning your instincts, your emotions, your ability to choose people. That's how one loss turns into self-doubt. You don't just grieve the person, you grieve your confidence in yourself. And slowly you start believing that maybe you're bad at choosing, that maybe your judgment can't be trusted. But here's what matters. You didn't misjudge their potential. You misjudged their capacity. Those are not the same thing. Someone can see you, feel close to you, even care about you, and still not be capable of staying. That doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you gave someone access before you saw their limits clearly. That's not something to punish yourself for. That's something to learn from without hardening, because the goal isn't to trust less. It's to trust wiser. Opening up again after something like that feels risky. Not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to disappear inside it, so you move slower this time, not closed, just intentional. You stop rushing closeness. You let consistency show itself before attachment does. You watch how someone handles honesty, not just how they respond to it, because being open doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means choosing who earns access. You learn that real safety isn't instant chemistry. It's follow through. It's effort that doesn't fade when things get quiet. It's someone staying curious instead of pulling away. And you stop over-explaining yourself. You don't justify your needs. You don't apologize for caring. You don't chase clarity from people who disappear. Instead of communicate. That's not walls, that's boundaries. You realize you don't need to prove your depth anymore. The right people recognize it without being overwhelmed, and for the first time, opening up doesn't feel like self-abandonment. It feels like alignment. You're still honest, still real, still deep, just no longer handing your heart to people who haven't shown they can hold it. At the end of all this, you start to understand something important. The people who stay don't make you feel confused. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you guess where you stand. They don't make you question whether being yourself was a mistake. They stay because they see you, not in spite of it. They don't flinch at your depth. They don't rush you to be easier. They don't treat your honesty like a burden. They meet you with steadiness, not perfection, not constant intensity, just consistency, and that's how you know. because real connection doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't make you anxious after silence. It doesn't leave you replaying everything you said. It feels calm, grounded, safe in a way that doesn't need explaining. You stop wondering if you're too much. You stop preparing yourself for disappearance. You stop shrinking to be kept, and you realize something quietly powerful. The people who left weren't proof that you were hard to love. They were proof that you were inviting people into a depth they hadn't earned yet. And that's not something to regret, because being seen was never a mistake. Being honest was never a flaw. Caring deeply was never the wrong move. The right people won't vanish once they understand you. They'll stay because of it. Sometimes the question isn't, will I find love? It's deeper than that. It's, will someone ever choose me the way I choose them? Not temporarily, not when it's convenient, not when they're bored, but fully. There's a difference between being liked and being chosen. Liked is easy, chosen is intentional. And if you've been the one who always gives more, who stays longer, who loves harder, you start wondering if maybe you're meant to be the giver but never the one kept. You watch other people get picked without hesitation, publicly, proudly, confidently, and you sit there thinking, what is it about me that makes people unsure? Is it timing? Is it me? Am I too much? Not enough? And the scariest part isn't being alone. It's the thought that maybe you'll always be almost chosen. Being the almost changes you. You're not rejected loudly. You're not cut off dramatically. You're just not picked. You're the one they talk to every day until they meet someone else. The one they say they really like but never commit to. The one who's good enough to keep around, just not good enough to claim. And that messes with your head because there's no clear reason. They don't say you're lacking. They don't say you're the problem, they just hesitate, and hesitation feels personal. You start replaying everything. Was I too available, too understanding, too patient, or maybe not exciting enough, not mysterious enough, not whatever it takes to be chosen instantly? And slowly, your self-worth gets tied to someone else's indecision. That's the dangerous part, because being the almost doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like you were close enough to hope, close enough to imagine it, close enough to get attached, but not close enough to stay. And when that keeps happening, you don't just question love, you question yourself. After being almost chosen enough times, you start adjusting yourself, not dramatically, not obviously, just subtly. You become a little less expressive, a little less attached, a little less honest about how much you care. Because maybe that's the problem. Maybe you're too available, too deep, too ready. So you try being cooler, more detached, more mysterious. You pretend you don't need reassurance. You act like you're fine with seeing where it goes. You downplay your feelings so you don't scare anyone off. But here's the truth. Shrinking yourself doesn't make you more lovable. It just makes you less visible. And the worst part? Even when you adjust, even when you play it safe, you still end up almost chosen, because the issue was never that you were too much, it's that you were giving depth to people who weren't ready for it. And instead of realizing that, you internalized their hesitation, you made it about your value, you thought, if I just change this one thing, maybe next time they'll stay. But love isn't unlocked by becoming smaller. It's aligned by being fully yourself and meeting someone who doesn't hesitate. And the sooner you stop reshaping yourself for someone's indecision, the sooner you realize you were never lacking. You were just misaligned. After a while, you stop expecting to be chosen, not because you don't want it, but because you're tired of getting your hopes up. So now, whenever something starts to feel good, you brace yourself. You tell yourself not to get excited, not to imagine too far ahead, not to believe it too much, because history has taught you how this usually ends. You assume they'll lose interest, assume they'll find someone better, assume you'll become the almost again. And that mindset is heavy, because you're not just protecting yourself, you're preparing for rejection before it even happens. You start reading into small changes, shorter text, longer replies, different energy. And instead of feeling secure, you feel on edge, not because they've done something wrong, but because you've been here before. You've felt the slow fade. You've watched interest turn into distance. You've experienced the shift from excitement to uncertainty. So now you expect it, and expecting rejection changes how you show up. You hold back. You don't fully invest. You act like you care less than you do. Because if it falls apart again, at least you can say you weren't all in. But deep down, you don't want to live like that. You don't want to approach love like it's already ending. You just want one time where it doesn't. There's a difference between being unwanted and being unmatched. And if you've been the almost too many times, you start confusing the two. Unwanted feels personal, like there's something wrong with you, like you're missing some quality everyone else seems to have. Unmatched is different. Unmatched means the timing was off, the emotional depth wasn't equal, the intentions weren't aligned. Unmatched isn't about your worth, it's about compatibility. But when someone hesitates to choose you, it doesn't feel like misalignment, it feels like rejection. And rejection feels final. You forget that love isn't a competition, that being chosen isn't about being better, it's about being right for each other at the same time. You can be attractive, kind, emotionally available, and still not be someone's person. That doesn't reduce you. It just means alignment wasn't there. And the moment you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Were we actually aligned?" everything shifts, because maybe you weren't almost chosen. Maybe you were just never meant to settle for someone unsure. Here's something you don't realize at first. Your fear of not being chosen might actually be protecting you, because when you're scared of being the almost again, you start paying attention. You notice inconsistency faster. You recognize mixed signals sooner. You don't ignore hesitation like you used to. Before, you'd cling to potential. You'd fill in gaps with hope. You'd convince yourself that uncertainty just needed time. Now, you watch. You see when someone's energy shifts. You see when effort isn't equal. You see when you're the only one leaning in. And instead of begging to be chosen, you pull back. Not out of ego, not out of pride, but out of self-respect, because deep down you don't want to be chosen by someone who's unsure. You don't want to be picked after being compared, after being doubted, after being an option. You want someone certain. So maybe the real shift isn't asking, "Will I ever be chosen?" It's asking, do I even want to be chosen by someone who hesitates? And that question changes everything. At some point you get tired of chasing certainty from other people. You get tired of waiting for someone to confirm your value, tired of reading into words, tired of hoping their actions will finally match. So something shifts. Instead of asking, do they want me? You start asking, do I even want this? That's power. Because when you become certain in yourself, you stop needing constant reassurance. You know what you bring, you know how you love, you know the depth you offer. And that confidence changes your energy. You don't beg, you don't overprove, you don't shrink to stay, you let people show up or not. And if they hesitate, you don't internalize it. You understand that someone else's confusion is not a reflection of your worth. You stop trying to convince people to choose you, because the right person won't need convincing. They'll recognize you, and more importantly, you'll recognize them. Not because they picked you, but because they're clear, consistent, and certain. And this time, certainty goes both ways. Here's the part nobody tells you. Being chosen starts with choosing yourself first, not in a cliche way, not in a I don't need anyone way, but in a real way. It's choosing not to stay where you feel unsure, choosing not to compete for attention, choosing not to lower your standards just to secure a spot in someone's life. Because when you don't choose yourself, you'll accept being almost chosen. You'll accept being an option, maybe a placeholder. But when you decide you're not negotiable, everything shifts. You stop trying to earn love. You stop proving your worth. You stop overextending just to feel wanted. You realize something important. If someone has to debate whether you're enough, they're not your person. Choosing yourself means walking away even when you like them, even when there's potential, even when part of you hopes they'll change, because you don't want reluctant love. You want certainty. And the moment you become certain that you deserve that, you stop fearing the question, will Will I ever be chosen because you already are? By yourself. Love feels different when you don't need it to validate you. Before, being chosen felt like proof that you were enough, proof that you were desirable, proof that you mattered. So when someone hesitated, it shook you because it felt like they were confirming your worst fear. Now, love isn't proof anymore, it's a bonus. You don't look at someone's commitment as a measurement of your worth. You don't panic when someone pulls away. You don't chase reassurance like you used to, because your value isn't waiting on someone else's decision, and that changes everything. You approach love calmly. You enjoy it without clinging to it. You let it build instead of forcing it. You don't need someone to choose you to feel complete. You want to be chosen, yes, but you don't need it to feel worthy. And that shift is powerful, because when love is no longer validation, you stop settling for almost. You stop trying to convince someone. You stop auditioning for a role in their life. You let them decide. And if they hesitate, you don't break, you move on. So, will I ever be chosen? Yeah, but not in the way I used to think. I used to believe being chosen meant someone finally seeing my value, finally realizing what I bring, finally deciding I was enough. But I see it differently now. The right person won't discover my worth. They'll recognize it immediately. There won't be hesitation, no comparing, no, I'm not sure what I want. It'll be clear, because when someone is aligned with you, choosing you isn't a debate, it's natural. And here's the real answer to the question: I will be chosen when I stop entertaining people who are unsure. I will be chosen when I don't accept almost, when I don't beg for clarity, when I walk away from hesitation. Because being chosen isn't about being better than someone else. It's about being right for someone who's right for you. And until that happens, I'm not behind, I'm not lacking, I'm not unlovable, I'm just not settling. So yeah, I'll be chosen. Not by someone confused, not by someone temporary, not by someone half in, but by someone certain. And this time I'll be just as certain back. Some nights, I stay up hugging my pillow pretending it's someone. Not because I'm dramatic, but because it gets lonely when no one chooses you. You start wondering if love just missed you, if maybe everyone else got picked and you were the one who got skipped over. I tell myself I'm fine being alone, and most days I am. But late at night, when the world is quiet, that's when the question comes back: will love ever find me? Or am I just meant to imagine it? I think the hardest part is not the loneliness. It's feeling like you have so much love to give and nowhere to put it, no hands to hold, no one to come home to, just you, your thoughts, and the same hope you keep tucking away every morning. And what scares me most is not being alone right now. It's the thought that maybe this is permanent. Being alone doesn't hurt the most. Being unchosen does. It's watching people find each other while you keep ending up by yourself. It's being told your time will come so many times that it starts to feel like a placeholder sentence. You start questioning yourself. Am I too quiet? Too much? Not enough? You replay everything, trying to find the reason no one stayed. And late at night, when you're hugging a pillow imagining it's someone who wants you back, those thoughts get louder. Not because you don't love yourself, but because you're tired of being the only one who does. The scary part is how slowly it affects your worth. You don't stop believing in love, you stop believing it wants you, and that's when loneliness becomes heavier than silence, because now it's not just about being alone, it's about wondering if something is wrong with you for being alone this long. This feeling doesn't mean you're unlovable, even though it really feels like it. It means you've been alone long enough for the silence to start telling stories. And silence is loud when it goes on too long. You start mistaking timing for rejection. You start turning waiting into a flaw. You start thinking love hasn't found you because you're missing something. But love doesn't work on fairness, and it doesn't run on schedules. Some people find it early. Some people find it after they've learned how to sit with themselves at night. And that doesn't make you behind. It makes you human. The fact that you still want love, still imagine it, still hope for it, even after feeling unchosen, that's not weakness. That's proof your heart didn't close. Imagining love at night doesn't make you desperate. It means you're human. You're not hugging a pillow because you're weak. You're doing it because your body remembers what closeness feels like, even when your life hasn't caught up yet. There's nothing wrong with wanting someone to come home to, with wishing there was a hand to reach for when the day finally goes quiet. The problem isn't that you imagine love, it's that you've been alone long enough to start believing wanting it is something you need to outgrow. But love isn't something you mature out of, something you wait for without turning against yourself in the meantime. You don't need to shame the part of you that still hopes at night. That part is just proof you haven't gone numb, and as long as you haven't gone numb, love hasn't missed you. Loneliness at night doesn't get to decide your future. Even when it feels endless, nights are heavy because they strip everything down. No distractions, no noise, just you and the question you try not to ask during the day. But night feelings aren't prophecies. They're just unmet needs speaking when everything else is quiet. Being alone right now doesn't mean you'll always be alone. And being unchosen so far doesn't mean you're unchoosable. It just means you haven't been met yet. There's a difference. You're not behind. You're not forgotten. You're not running out of time. You're just in the part of the story where love hasn't arrived, not the part where it never does. The hardest balance is holding hope without turning it into self-doubt, because when you hope for something for a long time, it can start to feel personal when it hasn't arrived yet. You tell yourself you're patient, but underneath that, there's a quiet fear that maybe hope is just another way of setting yourself up, so you try to numb it. You tell yourself you don't need love, you act like you're fine on your own, but hope doesn't disappear that way. It just goes quiet and waits for the night. The truth is, hope isn't the problem. Hope only hurts when you turn it inward and use it as proof that something is wrong with you. You're allowed to hope without questioning your worth. You're allowed to want love without it meaning you're lacking. Hope isn't weakness. It's just your heart still believing in a future you haven't reached yet. When love hasn't found you yet, it can make you feel invisible. You're moving through life unnoticed, unchosen, easy to pass by, but invisibility isn't the truth. It's just what loneliness whispers when it's tired of waiting. You don't get overlooked because you lack something. You get overlooked because connection isn't something you can force into timing. The right person doesn't miss you because they're better at noticing. They find you because they're looking for what you already are, and until then you're not invisible. You're just living in the space before recognition. That space feels quiet, it feels long, it feels unfair, but it isn't empty. It's shaping you into someone who will recognize real love when it finally arrives. Not because you're desperate for it, but because you're ready to receive it without disappearing into it. Love usually doesn't find you when you're proving you deserve it. It finds you when you stop performing and start existing. For a long time, I thought if I was good enough, patient enough, understanding enough, someone would finally see me. So I overgave, overthought, over-explained. But love doesn't arrive as a reward for endurance. It arrives when you're no longer shrinking to be easier to choose. The moment you stop asking, what do I need to fix? And start asking, what do I need to feel safe? Something shifts. You don't chase connection anymore, you allow it, and that doesn't make love come faster, and it makes it come healthier. Because the love that finds you then isn't choosing you because you tried hard enough. It's choosing you because you're finally standing still as yourself. Waiting is hard because it's empty time. Not empty in life, but empty in connection. You're still living, still growing, still doing everything you're supposed to do, but there's no one to share the quiet with, and that's where loneliness sneaks in. The difference between waiting and loneliness is what you tell yourself while you're there. Loneliness says, nothing is happening because I'm not enough. Waiting says, something hasn't arrived yet, and that's not a reflection of my worth. Learning to sit in the waiting doesn't mean pretending you don't want love. It means refusing to let the absence of it turn into self-blame. You can want love deeply and still treat yourself gently in the meantime. You can feel the quiet without letting it convince you that this is all there will ever be, because waiting isn't where your story ends. It's just the space between who you've been and who you're about to meet. There's a moment when hope stops hurting, not because love arrived, but because you stop fighting yourself while waiting. You stop asking the question every night with fear in it. You still want love, you still imagine it, but it no longer feels like your life is on hold without it. Hope becomes something gentle, something you carry, not something that weighs you down. You realize love finding you was never about being chosen faster or proving you're worthy enough. It was about becoming someone who doesn't disappear while waiting to be seen. And when that shift happens, loneliness loosens its grip, not because you're no longer alone, but because you're no longer against yourself. That's when hope becomes safe again, and that's usually right before love finally knows where to find you. Some nights you still wish someone was there, and that doesn't mean the healing didn't work. It just means you're human. Missing connection isn't a setback. It's not proof you're regressing or going backward. It's just your heart remembering what it wants to share. The difference now is that the wanting doesn't hurt the same. It doesn't spiral. It doesn't turn into panic. It doesn't make you question your worth. It just exists. You can want love without feeling empty without it. You can imagine closeness without feeling broken when it's not there yet. And that's growth. Because you're no longer waiting with desperation. You're waiting with trust. Trust that love doesn't miss people who are becoming more themselves. It finds them when they're steady enough to receive it without disappearing. The love that finds you after this season feels different, not louder, not dramatic, safer. It doesn't make you question yourself. It doesn't make you wonder where you stand. It doesn't ask you to stay up at night holding space for uncertainty. It meets you where you are. And because you've spent time alone, because you've learned how to sit with yourself, you don't cling to it, you appreciate it, you don't lose yourself in it because you know what it feels like to hold yourself first. That's why this waiting was never a punishment. It was preparation, not to make you stronger in a hard way, but steadier in a soft one. So if you're still alone right now, still asking if love will ever find you, it will. And when it does, you'll understand why it couldn't find you earlier. You weren't meant to be met when you were questioning your worth. You were meant to be met when you finally believed you were already enough. If you're asking that question right now, it doesn't mean you're behind. It means you're honest. You're honest about wanting connection, about feeling alone sometimes, about hoping there's more than just nights where you hug a pillow and imagine what could be. And that honesty matters. Love doesn't find people who gave up on it. It finds people who stayed open even when it hurt, people who learned how to be alone without becoming bitter, who waited without turning against themselves. So no, love didn't miss you. It just hasn't arrived yet. And when it does, it won't feel like something you chased or finally earned. It'll feel like something that recognizes you, like it knew where you were the whole time, and suddenly those nights won't feel so heavy anymore. Not because you forgot them, but because they led you right where you were meant to be. One day you won't ask the question anymore, not because love arrived overnight, but because you stopped measuring your life by what's missing. You'll still want connection, you'll still imagine it sometimes, but it won't feel heavy. You'll realize you didn't waste these nights. You were learning how to stay gentle in a quiet season, and that matters because the love that eventually finds you won't have to convince you that you're worth choosing. You'll already know. And when someone finally holds you, it won't feel like something you waited forever for. It'll feel like something that arrived right when you were ready to be seen, not as someone hoping to be chosen, but as someone whole.